Welcome to Combustion, written by Julie L. Spencer, narrated by author Julie L. Spencer. Prologue. My heart raced in disbelief as the police officer snapped his handcuffs around my wrist and pulled me toward his cruiser. I couldn't hide the alcohol on my breath and wondered which one of Wade's older brothers would also get arrested. Maybe both of them. As an 18-year-old, I would be charged as an adult. One moment of weakness and my life was over. I wondered if they'd let me graduate high school next month, how my team would fare next week at our baseball game without their star pitcher, how my girlfriend would get home from the party. My girlfriend. I'd probably never see her again. Not true. I'd see her in the courtroom when she testified against me. I'd see her beautiful blue eyes every night in my dreams. I'd see the makeup smeared down her cheeks in every one of my nightmares. She'd never forgive me for what I did. My life was over. Chapter 1. New Girl / Freshman. 8 months earlier. Kaelen. I'll never forget the first day of 2-a-day football practices, because that was also the day the cheerleaders came to the field for the first time. They usually practiced indoors or on a field somewhere else, but their coach wanted them to start on the rubbery asphalt of the track that circles the football field so they could get a feel for the difference in surfaces. The football players felt something different having the cheerleaders here and watching us. They had to watch us, of course. How else would they know how to cheer for a football team? We couldn't have them cheering for a rebound when they should be cheering for an interception, or a basket when they should be cheering for a touchdown. We noticed them, and they noticed us, and we all pretended that we weren't watching each other. Inevitably, my eyes were drawn to a girl I'd never seen before. She was either new to our school or a freshman. I could handle new. The incoming freshmen were off limits. 9th graders were too young to date, period. End of story. That was pounded into our heads by our coaches and parents and teachers. They hadn't started practicing with uniforms yet, so they were in t-shirts and shorts. Short shorts. They all matched, like they had bought the clothes to attend a cheerleading camp or something. They had identical ponytails with ribbons, and at the end of the practice, they all pulled their scrunchies out and let their hair flow over their shoulders and down their backs. When the new girl / freshman pulled out her scrunchie, her hair fell in a cascade of brown natural waves. The noise that escaped my throat may have been a whimper. Thankfully, no one was close enough to hear me. I had to meet her. Soon. All I could think was she'd better not be a freshman. Chapter 2. Valedictorian. Abigail. Abigail, oh my gosh, Kaelen Andrews is totally staring at you. Sarah bumped my shoulder. Whatever. There are 12 girls over here. How do you know he's staring at me? I turned away from his obvious attention and shoved my palms into my duffel bag. Trying not to think about Kaelen's eyes, I pulled out my water bottle and squirted water into my mouth. Yeah, Sarah was right. He was staring at me. Star quarterback, big, but lean and strong. Hot, smoking hot. And I don't mean overheated and sweaty, although he was, in a really, really good way. The afternoon was muggy, and the sun beat down without a single tree to provide much-needed shade. Late August in Michigan was not the time of year to be outdoors. I understood the need to get a feel for the spongy asphalt of the track circling the football field rather than cheering on grass or the basketball court, but we really could have waited a few weeks until the autumn weather cooled. If we had waited, I wouldn't have seen him that afternoon. Once school started, we'd be separated based on demographics within the building. Freshmen weren't allowed in the senior hallway, and seniors weren't allowed in the freshman hallway. On Friday nights, the football players were focused on the game and wearing helmets. I suppose we still would have seen each other in the library on the first day of school, but maybe he wouldn't have been drawn to me as he was. That book was on the top shelf, and I was climbing up the stack to reach the darn thing. He was tall. I was short. He was startled by my choice in reading material. I was startled by his ability to understand my chosen reading material. Kaelen Andrews was the smartest boy I'd ever met. Almost as smart as me. He hid his intelligence well. Very few people knew that his dumb jock persona was fake. He would have been in the top 10 of his class, if not the valedictorian, if they had let him graduate, which they didn't. Chapter 3. Applied Behavior Analysis. Kaelen. "She's a freshman," I mumbled. "Don't even think about it, Kaelen." Maybe if I continued telling myself to stay away from her, I would continue to have the willpower. The library wasn't really the place to pick up girls anyway. I usually came here to avoid girls. I'd been the unofficial star quarterback since sophomore year, hiding behind whatever senior claimed the title and called the shots as captain. With clockwork precision, the coach used what he called the baseball principle. 3 strikes, you're out. If the starting quarterback made a mistake, that was a strike. By the end of the first quarter, I was almost always behind the snap for the rest of the game. Now I was a senior, and the top spot was solidly mine. Combined with my athletic physique and good looks, I'd been coveted by girls since the time my face stopped breaking out in acne. Coincidentally, that was also the summer I bought my 20-year-old Mustang and rebuilt her from the ground up. She was perfect. Sparkling candy apple red, and I finished a few days before my 16th birthday. Girls watched me all the time. When I drove in the parking lot, when I walked down the hallway, when I cracked jokes in class to fluster the teachers, and most definitely on whatever court or field I happened to be playing on. For some reason, they ignored me in the library. I always spread out my books and notebooks and calculators and was bent over the table as if I was frantically trying to finish homework last minute. If only they knew. I wasn't doing homework or studying for a class. My homework was complete long before everyone else's. Having a photographic memory, I'd memorized every textbook of required reading for all of my classes. I could pull images and text from the far reaches of my brain and ace every test. No, I was conducting research. Almost always. Very few people knew of my 165 IQ, and I wanted to keep it that way. They would all be surprised when the valedictorian and top 10 in our senior class were announced, because I would be either in the top spot or darn close. I'd seen the way the popular kids treated the geeks, as if there was something wrong with them. I vowed at a very young age not to be a geek. I didn't go out of my way to make fun of them, though, as some of my friends did. I tried to be the guy everyone wanted to hang out with. That meant being nice to everyone. That was the only reason I rushed to her side that afternoon, just to be nice. She couldn't reach a book on the top shelf and was climbing up the side of the stack of shelves and teetering. My hands found themselves on her hips, and I helped her down to the ground. "Let me get that for you," I said, trying hard not to meet her gaze. Applied behavior analysis? There must be a story behind why you need that particular book. I rested the book in her hands and finally met her gaze. She had blue eyes the color of a robin's egg, fair skin with a dusting of freckles, and chestnut hair that hung in waves down her back. "I'm studying." Her tone was defensive, as if I were going to laugh at her. She clutched the book to her chest. Lucky book. "For what?" I asked. "There are no classes at this high school for which that book is required reading material." "I'm just interested in the subject matter, that's all." Her nose was already in the air because she was staring up at me, but I swear she lifted her chin just a little higher. "That's actually a pretty good book," I said. "Lower college level. You won't need a PhD to understand the material." "You've read this book?" She held it up with a question in her eyes. "Why?" "Same reason as you. I'm curious." "Is psychology a career you want to pursue?" She leaned against the shelving unit across from where I stood. "I have no idea what career to choose," I said. "That's why I'm studying everything." "Who knows?" She shrugged. "Maybe your chosen career hasn't been invented yet." "I guess we'll have to work on inventing something. What about you? What do you want to do after high school?" Something in the behavioral sciences, probably some specific aspect of sociology." "Sounds fascinating." I forgot my rule about not talking to freshmen and lifted my hand to shake. "I'm Kaelen, by the way." She didn't hesitate to take my hand, and hers was soft and warm, but not sweaty. "Abigail." I didn't mean to sit with Abigail and spend my entire lunch period discussing the finer aspects of behavioral sciences, but suddenly the librarian joined us at the table. "Did you guys realize your lunch period ended 10 minutes ago?" the librarian asked. Maybe you can help us decide. I turned to Mrs. Haskins. Wouldn't classical conditioning actually fall into the category of operant conditioning? Because just the act in itself of pairing the neutral stimulus with the naturally occurring stimulus is instrumental conditioning, since the pairing of the two would be an instrument. No, Mrs. Haskins sat opposite us. Operant conditioning utilizes rewards and punishments and is much more active conditioning, whereas classic conditioning is more passive. See? Abigail pointed at me as if she'd won the argument. Little did she know how I'd tricked her into the argument in the first place. Maybe someday she'd realize the only way I could have asked the question was if I knew the material well enough to flip the two. The subject really wasn't that difficult to understand. However, Mrs. Haskins held up a finger, you also need to take into consideration that an association is made between the behavior and the consequence in much the same way that the association is made between the neutral stimuli and the naturally occurring stimuli. There's no perfect answer. Truce? I held out my hand for Abigail to shake. Fine, truce. She placed her hand in mine and a noticeable shiver ran up her arm. See? I leaned closer to stage whisper. I just caused you to associate that shiver up your spine with the act of placing your hand in mine. Or maybe that was my intention all along, Abigail stage whispered back, to draw you into an argument so I could get you to admit defeat. Truth and defeat are not mutually inclusive, I said. We still hadn't released one another's hands. Yeah, well, tardiness and detention are, Mrs. Haskins said. Let's get you 2 hall passes so our little discussion doesn't land you in hot water. That would definitely be using negative consequences to influence our desire to have further discussions on the topic. Abigail stood and slid her hand from mine. I would never want to use operant conditioning to deter you from spending time with me. When I rose to my feet, I towered over her by at least a foot. I leaned down to lift her hand into mine and laced our fingers together. We stayed intertwined while the librarian wrote us each a hall pass, and then I held Abigail's hand all the way to the other side of the school to drop her off at her class, even though my geography classroom was adjacent to the library. Thankfully, no one was in the hall to see us holding hands or to see my cheesy grin while I walked back to my class. Chapter 4. Frozen Pizza. Abigail. The library made seeing Kaelen effortless. I wondered if he ever ate lunch because he spent every lunch period with me, and no food was allowed in the library. He never held my hand again because we were never officially alone. If anyone noticed us from across the room, they'd assume he was tutoring me or I was tutoring him. We didn't flirt much, we just talked. Definitions, theories, principles, religion, politics, classic literature, pop culture, nothing was off the table. Kaelen wasn't supposed to date a freshman, so he got around the rules by just hanging out in the library. Until one day that wasn't enough. I got stranded after cheerleading practice when my parents were heading out of town on a Thursday night. Cammie was supposed to drive me home, but she got sick at practice and left early. I slammed my locker shut in frustration and mumbled under my breath, "Now what?" "What's the matter?" Kaelen's sultry voice startled me, and I placed my hand on my heart, trying to stop the pace. Still dressed in his football practice gear and carrying his shoulder pads and helmet, he had a heaviness to his hair and clothes, indicative of a grueling practice in preparation for tomorrow's game. "Cammie's sick, my parents are out of town, and I'm stranded without a ride home." "I can give you a ride home." He raised his eyebrows. "Won't you get in trouble for hanging out with a freshman?" "I hang out with you every day," he gulped. "In the library." "True." I turned toward the door at the end of the hallway, swinging my backpack over my shoulder. "It's just a ride home, right?" His nonchalance was playful. "A kind soul lending a hand to a friend who is stranded." "Sure, we'll go with that." "And if that ride home just happened to involve a goodnight kiss, no big deal, right?" "If that ride home involved a goodnight kiss, it might be misconstrued as a date." No, we can't call it a date because I'm not allowed to date freshmen." "We'll have to call this non-date something else then." I scratched my chin, feigning deep thought. Kaelen pushed open the door at the end of the hallway and held it for me. Darkness was falling, but there were still a few cars in the parking lot. I tried to act casual and not look around to see if anyone else saw us walking together. If you open the passenger door for me, this non-date will definitely look like a date if anyone sees you. Kaelen popped the key fob in his Mustang and headed straight for the driver's side. He opened the back door and shoved his football gear inside and then got into the driver's seat. I casually opened the passenger door and slid into the passenger seat. For an older car, it sure smelled good. What cologne do you wear? I couldn't help it. The words just slipped out. Why? You like it? His smirk told me he knew darn well I liked it. I didn't answer, just pulled my seatbelt around with a click and tried not to take deep, passionate whiffs of the inside of his car. The Mustang roared to life and Kaelen backed out of his parking space, barely taking his eyes off mine. Do you need directions to my house? I know where you live. His voice lowered. I tried not to read too much into the connotation. We didn't speak much on the drive, and I wondered if his thoughts were heading in the same direction as mine. An empty house, my parents are out of town, a long hidden driveway where no one from the street would be able to see a shiny red Mustang parked. He slowed to turn into my drive and crept along under the overhanging trees that formed a tunnel when in full leaf. The leaves had all turned oranges and yellows and reds and had begun falling, creating a multicolored asphalt path. When he pulled up the circle drive and parked in front of my house, he put the car in park but didn't shut off the engine. Maybe he was busy that evening. Maybe he had homework or a job. Maybe he was hungry. Want me to heat up a frozen pizza? I asked. His car was off and his door was open faster than I could register his answer. Obviously, yes, he did indeed want to come into my house alone and eat pizza. I opened the passenger door, but he was already around the car and holding out his hand to help me up. When I stood, his arms wove around my waist and pulled me close. His lips were so close to mine I could have reached onto my toes and connected. Kaelen's eyes darted back and forth, searching mine, asking for permission. I allowed a tiny smirk to pull at the corners of my mouth. Pizza? I whispered. Pizza, he answered, not releasing me from his arms. He leaned closer to my ear. I'm really hungry. I bet you are. He gulped and finally pulled back enough for me to reach into his car and grab my backpack off the floor mat. His hand rested on my hip as I leaned over, and I got the impression he would have liked to slide his hand further down. Instead, he looped a finger in one of my belt loops and didn't let go the entire time we were walking up the path to my house. Using my key, I opened the front door and then flicked on a light switch that bathed the grand foyer in a soft glow. I slipped off my shoes before leaving the tile and stepped onto the plush carpet. He followed my lead, and soon I was weaving my way back to the kitchen, turning on light switches as we entered each room or hallway. I like your house, he said. Thanks, I built it myself. He snickered at my joke. As soon as we reached the kitchen, he strode right over to the freezer and quickly found a boxed pizza. I walked directly to the oven and set the preheat to 400 degrees. He had the pizza unwrapped and ready before I had a chance to get out the baking pan. Within 2 minutes of entering the kitchen, we had the pizza in the oven and nothing to do with our time for about 18 to 20 minutes. His searching eyes probed mine, and he pushed me gently against the kitchen counter. I gulped. I've never kissed a boy before, I whispered. Would you like me to be your first kiss? You're sure you wouldn't mind that I don't know what I'm doing? I think I'd be more concerned if you did, he said. Why? Because I'm so young? He leaned closer to my ear. Because I want to be your first. First kiss. First everything. Everything? I gulped again. Had I given him the wrong impression by allowing him to come into my house without a chaperone? Did he think we were going to do everything tonight? Someday, he nodded with understanding. When we're ready. Have you ever... I hesitated, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Been ready before? He shook his head slowly back and forth. I want you to be my first. Someday. Why me? I asked the question I'd been dying to ask since the first time I saw him staring at me across the field. You could have any girl at our school with a snap of your fingers. You challenge me, he said. You're probably the only girl at our school who's as smart as I am. Probably smarter, I raised my eyebrows. Probably, he agreed. You do hold your own, even as a freshman. Imagine how smart you're going to be when you're my age. I'll never be your age, Kaelen. I'll always be 3 years younger than you, no matter how old you get. Ignoring my observation of our age difference, Kaelen continued his original suggestion. Because the pizza isn't out of the oven yet, maybe I should be your first kiss right now. Would you like that? I nodded, since I couldn't answer with words. He released my hips from his grasp and drew his hands up my arms, causing goosebumps to raise from my skin. He lifted my chin and took my face in his hands, gently, as if I were a delicate flower. His face lowered toward mine as if he was waiting for me to change my mind, giving me an out, a chance to tell him no, a chance to tell him to stop. I didn't. His lips touched mine softly at first, and a tiny whimper escaped my throat. Lifting onto my toes, I took the initiative to deepen our kiss. My first kiss. First of many, many more kisses, I hoped. The timer on the oven beeped and we both startled. He pulled away. Wow, that was... wow. I disentangled myself from his arms and reached into the drawer for a pair of oven mitts. I don't want the pizza to burn. Kaelen pulled open the handle to the oven and turned on the interior light. Heat escaped along with the aroma of spice marinara. But my thoughts weren't on food. Maybe the pizza needed about 2 more minutes. I set the timer and we were right back in each other's arms, kissing for 1 minute and 55 seconds. Even though we knew the timer would soon beep, the loud noise made us jump again. I think it's time for some pizza, I said. He held the door handle open for me, and this time I reached in and pulled out the baking sheet and rested it on the stove. His husky voice was an invitation. I think we're supposed to let that cool for a couple of minutes before cutting it. You're probably right, I said, and just like that we were distracted again. I wondered if kissing him would ever get old. I hoped not. Chapter 5. Relationship Status. Kaelen. I wanted to stay. I really did, but I knew I shouldn't. I didn't want Abigail to be afraid I'd ask to do something more physical than we should the night of our first kiss. And sleeping in each other's arms, even without sex, was just as intimate, if not more so. Between the two of us, we finished the entire pizza. Okay, she had 2 slices and I finished the rest. Eating pizza meant no kissing. So we started a movie while we ate. Within minutes of consuming the last bite, she was in my arms again, and we were kissing. Again. I forced myself to be satisfied with just kissing. I didn't want her to push me away or tell me I was going too fast. Tonight, we'd share our first kisses and nothing more. I didn't even let my hands wander. I was impressed with my own strength and resistance, but I also didn't want to test that strength and resistance. My parents are probably wondering why I didn't come home for dinner. Lying beside Abigail on the couch, I forced my mind to stay on safe topics. What are you going to tell them? Let's see. If I tell them the truth, they'll lock me in my bedroom and homeschool me for the remainder of my senior year, so that's not really an option. What is the truth, Kaelen? Vulnerability shone in those robin's egg blue eyes that gazed up at me from the crook of my arm. I searched them, wondering how deep into my heart I should let her explore. There was still the possibility of scaring her away. At 18, I was ready for a deeper relationship. At 15, she probably was not. But I also needed to let her know that I wanted a lot more from our relationship than what we had now. Abigail was smart for a 15-year-old. She'd probably be in the top 10 of her class in her senior year, just like me. Ours was a relationship based on substance. We could have real conversations, philosophical discussions. We brainstormed how to solve the problems of the world using science and math and technology. We read books and discussed them as if we were our own little 2-person book club. Neither of us knew where we wanted to narrow our focus and choose a future career, so we studied everything. She once said the careers we would eventually choose probably hadn't been invented yet. The truth. How do I put this into words? I met this beautiful girl in the library at my school, I said. She's the smartest girl I've ever met. She's a talented cheerleader, looks smoking hot in her uniform, and makes me want to do things I know I shouldn't. Yeah, probably best not to tell your parents that, she said with a chuckle. They would definitely lock you away for months. Are you okay with this? I waved my finger between my body and hers. Not just about us making out, but what it means for us as a couple. Do you want to be a couple? She was so adorably insecure, as if she still couldn't grasp that a senior star athlete who drew the attention of every single female at our school and beyond would actually be attracted to her. Yeah, I do. I don't exactly know how to make that happen, or how we could get around all the rules and regulations, but I'd like to try. I kissed the tip of her nose. I'm kind of crazy about you. I hesitated to use the big L word. I was still wondering when she was going to run away or ask me to leave. These past few weeks getting to know you have been some of the happiest weeks in my life, I said. Me too, she whispered. I want you to be my girlfriend. There, I'd said it. I want that too, but how? Discreetly? I raised my eyebrows. I mean, I'd kind of like our friends to know I'm officially off the market, but at the same time, to hide our relationship status from the adults in our life. I think our librarian, Mrs. Haskins, figured it out before we did, Abigail said. Thankfully, she can't take away my starting position on the football team, or bench me from cheering on Friday nights, or lock me in my bedroom and homeschool me for the rest of my senior year, I said, or ground me and not let me get my driver's license. Oh my gosh, when you say stuff like that, you remind me how young you still are. Sorry, she said. I kind of like you a lot, I said, forcing myself not to say the L word. I kind of like you a lot too. She bit her lower lip and made me want to kiss her again. If you're not ready for this, us being a couple, let me know, okay? I don't want to overwhelm you. So far, I'm not feeling overwhelmed. Her eyes were sincere. I want to kiss you one more time, but then I really need to go home, or my parents are going to kill me. Okay. This kiss was different. Tender, loving, not wild and passionate like what we'd experienced in the kitchen. Controlled, cautious, mature. A connection between two people who loved each other. Yes, although neither of us had said the word out loud, I was pretty sure we were in love. Ours was an intellectual connection that ran deeper than a high school crush. I pulled away and pressed my forehead to hers. Closing my eyes, I wanted to say the words out loud. I love you, Abigail Johnson. My soul spoke to hers and I felt certain she heard me. I need to go home now. She started to roll out of my arms, but I pulled her back and crushed my lips to hers again, hungrily, desperate, wanting every part of her. That kiss lasted less than a minute and I sat up quickly. Okay, now I really need to leave. I gently but insistently pulled away from her and left her alone on the sofa, the Afghan that had rested over our legs now falling half on the floor. The blue in her eyes was darker than usual and reflected a hunger I needed to walk away from. I pulled the blanket up over her, trying not to imagine tucking her into my bed. Leaning down to kiss her forehead, I whispered a goodbye and found my way to the front door and out to my car. Finally, as I was driving through the tunnel of colored leaves, I tried the words out loud. I love you, Abigail Johnson. Chapter 6. Combustion. Abigail. He's going to think it's so juvenile, I mumbled to myself as I wove through the stacks in the library to the back corner table that we had monopolized every day since that first day of school. When Kaelen lifted his head from the book he'd been reading, my stomach did a little flip. When he smiled, all my doubts flew off my shoulders, and I knew the night before hadn't been a fluke. He stood as I approached the table and glanced around before pulling me into a hug and a mildly passionate kiss. We backed away from each other, and he took a step back to admire me, his eyes trailing down to my little white shoes, up my legs, pausing longer than socially acceptable on certain regions of my body, and then finally met my gaze again. Dang, you look good in a cheerleading skirt. Why, thank you, sir. I gave him my best Southern Belle accent and then walked around the table to sit in my usual chair, always facing the room, prepared so no one could sneak up on us. You look pretty darn good in your jersey. Sometimes I wish you weren't a cheerleader so you could wear my away jersey. He scooted his chair a little closer to me and rested his hand on my knee. And then again, I wouldn't be able to see you in a cheerleading skirt every Friday. I made you something. I changed the subject and bit my lower lip. I'm afraid you're going to think it's stupid or something a middle school kid would do. If you made it, then it's special already. He rubbed his thumb across my kneecap and I almost moaned. We met each other's gaze and I forced my eyes not to go crossed. Kaelen chuckled and squeezed my knee, both tickling me and waking me from my stupor. Show me what you made. Well, I made one for each of us. I pulled 2 embroidered friendship bracelets from the pocket of my backpack. They were an intricately woven yellow and red pattern intended to look like flames. In the center of each, on a flat panel, a little larger than the width of a paperclip, I'd embroidered the letters 2H2 gaseous plus O2 gaseous yields 2H2O gaseous. No flippin' way. He took one from me and studied the lettering. How did you do that? You must have a super small needle. My grandma taught me. Do you know what it means? Heck yeah, it's perfect. He pulled me closer and kissed me firmly, forgetting to look around to make sure no one was nearby. Luckily, no one was. Here, put mine on and I'll put yours on. I tied the little bracelet around his left wrist, not too tight to cut off his circulation, but tight enough that it wouldn't slip off. He did the same on my wrist. No one will ever doubt why you and I are wearing matching friendship bracelets, he said, even if we can't show each other affection openly. You don't think they're too cheesy? I asked. You won't be embarrassed to wear yours? Babe, if I could shout from the rooftops that you're my girl, I would. Without hesitation. If this is the only way we can broadcast our relationship right now, I will treasure the little bracelet. I love it. Leaning close, Kaelen lifted my wrist and held his close to mine, examining the 2 bracelets side by side. And that's how my friend Sarah found us when she walked around the stack looking for a book. Her jaw gaped and she cried in a loud whisper, I knew it! Shh! Please, Sarah, you can't say anything to anyone. Kaelen could get in so much trouble. Oh, I think it's going to be obvious to anyone paying attention. She sat across from us at the table. How long has this been going on? We're just friends, I insisted. Okay, not. They're just friendship bracelets, I said. Kaelen sat back in his chair, gauging Sarah's reaction. He boldly took my hand and laced our fingers together, sending a clear message without words that our friendship went a lot deeper than just friends. I had no doubt that his message would be shared with all 700 of Sarah's Instagram followers before the end of lunch, and several thousand of their closest friends by the time the football game started that evening. Well, Kaelen got his wish. Between my bracelets and his bold statement in front of one of the most gossipy girls in our school, we just shouted our relationship from the rooftops. No going back now. Chapter 7. Playing with Fire. Kaelen. Nice bracelet, Coach Bryant said. I froze, my hands reaching to lace up my cleats, both wrists in full view. I resumed lacing without acknowledging his comment. When I'd barely finished tying the bow, Coach leaned over and lifted my wrist to get a closer look. I sat on the bench in the locker room, waiting for the inevitable conversation to follow. It looks strangely similar to the bracelet worn by one of our cheerleaders. I cleared my throat. Lots of people wear friendship bracelets. Matching friendship bracelets? He raised his eyebrows. I was keenly aware of a dozen football players in various stages of dressing for the game, all who had stopped and given Coach their full attention. You know, jewelry isn't allowed while wearing your uniform. He let his statement hang in the air. I felt the air rush from my lungs. Coach, please don't make me cut this off, I choked out. My friend who made this would be devastated. Do you know how much time that embroidery must have taken? That is very intricate and well made. Your friend must be very talented with a needle and embroidery thread. I held my breath. begging with my gaze, not breaking eye contact. Please don't make me cut this off. Please don't make me cut this off. Interesting choice in chemical equations. Coach released my hand and raised his eyebrows. Do you know what happens when you play with fire? Neither of us answered his rhetorical question as he backed away. He glanced around at the gathering audience. On the field for practice in 10, Coach said loud enough for everyone in the locker room to hear. Then he walked from the room. I let out a breath I'd been holding and glanced down at the beautiful yellow and orange flames licking my wrists, thankful the masterpiece would stay in place for at least a little while. Wade stepped forward and read the embroidered letters and numbers. What's the chemical equation stand for? Everyone in the room was listening for my answer, and I glanced around before allowing a tiny smirk to pull at the corners of my lips. Combustion. That earned snickers and guffaws as the guys resumed dressing for the game. Yup, I was indeed playing with fire. Chapter 8. Almost Ready. Abigail. Months of never getting caught had led to complacency. Kaelen and I spent every lunch hour together, texted back and forth all day long, talked on our phones late into the night, and found little moments here and there to connect whenever we could. The adults at school turned a blind eye to what the high school kids did for the most part, but we didn't push our luck. We never blatantly showed any public displays of affection, never walked down the hall holding hands, never kissed each other to say hello or goodbye. Our parents had no idea, or so we thought. Maybe they knew more than they wanted to admit, just like the adults at our school. There was this beach over on Lake Michigan, and the adults in our lives had their heads stuck right in the sand. Not that we were complaining. Stolen moments were fun, and we were enjoying a few too many stolen moments. Lunchtimes were for philosophizing. Late-night phone conversations were for planning our future together, and while in the presence of our peers, we usually only flirted. That meant by the time we found a few minutes alone, when we knew we wouldn't be caught, we made out. Sometimes we made out a little too much, and I had to put on the brakes. Kaelen insisted he respected me and was willing to wait until we were both ready. I appreciated that. I was really close to being ready. While discussing our future, we no longer talked about wanting to be each other's first. We wanted to be each other's one and only. Naive? Maybe. During spring break, Kaelen traveled with his baseball team to Florida for a special camp run by professional baseball players. We didn't have cheerleading in the spring season, so I spent spring break with my parents. For some stupid reason I'll never understand, college professors had spring break on a different week than high school students, so we could never go anywhere or do anything while my dad was teaching. I often went up to the college to sit in on my dad's lectures, and he'd talk to his professor friends in other departments, and they would let me sit in on their classes as well. Having a genius-level IQ, I was usually one of the smarter kids in every college class, even though I was a freshman in high school. Even when I was in junior high, I was usually smarter. Apparently, I wasn't smart enough to say no to alcohol a few weeks later. That was the first and last night Kaelen took me to a party at Wade's house. The night my life ended, and this nightmare began. Chapter 9. #MeToo. Kaelen. Kissing on the sofa in the basement rec room wasn't enough. The party was in full swing throughout the house, but I knew Wade's bedroom was on the other side of that door. He loved having his bedroom so close to the game room. Growing up, we'd spent many days and nights down here playing video games and shooting pool and playing foosball and ping pong. Then we'd all crash on the sofas or on the floor in Wade's bedroom. Wade's house was always the party house. Now that we were seniors, the parties usually involved alcohol and girls. I was one of the lucky guys who had a steady girlfriend, even if we had to keep our relationship on the down low. At 15, Abigail was still too young. If her dad found out we were dating, he'd get out his shotgun. But we were in love, and we were inseparable. All of our friends at school knew it. The teachers and coaches probably suspected it. But we did our best to hide from all the adults in both of our lives. I had already chosen potential universities based on a 1-hour radius from our home because Abigail still had 3 years of high school and I refused to live any farther away. No problem. I played 3 sports and probably could have handled more if the school would let me be on more than one team per season. I chose the 3 most likely to draw bank for scholarships: football, basketball, and baseball. I was holding out until the end of baseball season to decide which scholarship to choose because I already had several offers on the table for football and basketball. My parents were proud of me. My grades were near perfect, and I was friends with everyone. I was respected and popular. I was one of the cool kids. My one bout of stupidity was partying on Saturday nights. All the athletes played the system well. We knew the coaches never called practices on Sunday mornings because the parents would freak out if their little boy and girl athletes had to miss church to go to a mandatory practice. As long as we didn't party too late into the night on Saturdays, and as long as we didn't drink too much alcohol, our hangovers would be gone by Sunday afternoon. That night was no exception. No one at the party paid us any attention. Tucked into the corner on one of the sofas close to Wade's bedroom, the lights were off in this section of the basement. The television and main gaming area were on the other side of the room. The only people over here were those of us making out with our girlfriends. Abigail and I were going a little further than usual. Maybe I was a little drunker than usual. She was drunk too. Both of my hands were up her shirt and her bra had come off half an hour ago. She'd had her hands down my sweatpants for several minutes and I was dying. We'd talked about sex before. What couple didn't? It was just a matter of time before we'd be ready. Before she'd be ready. I was beyond ready and had been for a long time, but I respected her enough to wait. We'd waited 8 months since the first time I'd seen her across the football field at school and couldn't take my eyes off her. That night I couldn't take my hands off her. "Want to go into Wade's bedroom and close the door?" I mumbled between kisses. "We could get some of these clothes out of the way." "Mm-hmm." She barely paused her kissing to answer me with a noise that was more of a moan than words. That sent me over the top. I lifted Abigail off my lap and carried her into Wade's bedroom, kicking the door closed with my foot. I practically dumped her onto the bed and she scooted back to make room for me, reaching for me with her arms and wrapping her legs around my waist as I fell on top of her, continuing the kisses where we'd left off before leaving the rec room. We didn't bother taking off shirts. They weren't in our way. Her skirt was up and my sweats were down so fast I didn't remember how it happened. I was on top of her for no more than 2 seconds when she cried out in pain. "Stop, Kaelen, stop!" she cried. "You're hurting me." "I can't stop," I groaned, and I couldn't. The momentum of my body moving against hers overwhelmed me. I was beyond thinking. My body had taken over my alcohol-clouded mind. "Ow, you're hurting me! Stop! Oh my gosh, Kaelen, stop!" "I can't, babe. I'm sorry." Why couldn't I stop? I was hurting her. All I could think was, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I knew before it was over that I'd messed up. I knew as I drew in the scent of her hair with each deep, passionate breath that this was the last time I'd savor the fragrance of her shampoo. I knew from the way she pushed me away and crouched near the corner of Wade's bed, clutching her legs to her chest, sobbing. I knew from the way tears rolled down my cheeks as I yanked up my sweats and pressed my face into Wade's pillow, hiding my sobs and shame. I knew from the way her friend Sarah was trying to calm her down, and the way some of my buddies were there shaking their heads in disgust. Not cool, man. Idiot. Dude, what were you thinking? Abigail and I met each other's gaze from opposite sides of the bed, both of us with tears streaming down our faces, her cheeks streaked with mascara. I reached my hand out for her, and she reached her hand out for me, and our fingers interlaced for the last time before 2 of her friends yanked her away from me and led her from the room. Eventually, sirens sounded in the distance, and I buried my head into the pillow again, waiting for the inevitable. That wasn't the last time I cried that night. Chapter 10. No Hospital. Abigail. "Where are you taking me?" I demanded. "No, I am not leaving without Kaelen. Heck no." Sarah and Cammy were dragging me, and I was digging in my heels. "Honey, you've got to go to the hospital," Cammy cooed at me, trying to be supportive. "They'll do an examination, and you can give a statement to the police." "No, no way. No hospitals. No police." "The police are already here. It's going to be okay now. He can't hurt you anymore." Sarah's words were slurred. So were Cammie's. So were mine. My brain couldn't function through the alcohol or through the sobs. They dragged me almost all the way to Cammie's car when I watched Kaelen leaving the house in handcuffs. "No!" I shouted. "Let him go! He didn't do anything wrong! Let him go!" Sarah stepped in between our line of sight so I didn't see Kaelen being loaded into the back of the police cruiser, but I could picture it in my mind. Nothing was making sense. Somehow they got me in the backseat of Cammie's car, and Sarah held my head on her lap as I sobbed all the way to the hospital. I thought they were taking me home. I thought when they helped me from the car and walked with me that they were walking me up to my house. I didn't realize I was in the emergency room until I heard someone coughing and the lights were too bright. "Miss, I'm your triage nurse. Can you tell me your name?" some guy asked. His name tag read Brad. He looked like a Brad, if a Brad could have a look. I was too drunk to figure out what a Brad was supposed to look like. "I'm going to help you get settled in a room so the doctor can talk to you, okay?" "No, I want to know that Kalen's okay." "Her name is Abigail Johnson," Cammie told the guy named Brad, who looked like a Brad. "How much have you had to drink, Abigail?" He shined a light in my eyes and I cringed away from him. A woman, I didn't notice her name tag, helped me sit on a bed. That reminded me of the bed where I'd just been violated. I jumped off the bed and kicked it. "Get away from me, all of you. Leave me alone. No hospitals, no beds." My knees buckled and I nearly fell to the ground, except the guy named Brad caught me and the woman helped me back onto the bed. Tears ran down my face as I lay there staring at the wall. No hospitals, no beds, no hospital. That was all I remembered. I don't know how many hours passed. Chapter 11. Confession. Kaelen. "What are you doing with those scissors?" I watched in horror as the officer snipped off Abigail's friendship bracelet as if it was just a wristband from the fairgrounds. "No! Give me back my bracelet!" It fell to the ground like a feather. "Give me back my bracelet!" I pleaded with deep sobs. "It's my bracelet! Give it back! Give it back!" "I'll put your little bracelet in your bag of belongings. You can have it back after you're out on bail. Lift your thumb, please. Place it on the pad and roll it back and forth." I didn't know why he was asking me to do that because he was moving my hand for me, back and forth. I continued sobbing as he lifted each of my fingers and moved it back and forth on the little ink pad. Back and forth, back and forth. He started to pull me away from the counter, but I resisted. "Get my bracelet!" The officer nodded to his partner. "Can you get that little piece of yarn? He wants to keep it." "It's not yarn," I insisted through my sobs. "It's embroidery thread. Whatever it is, it's filthy." The officer held it up by 2 fingers and found a bag that would apparently contain all my worldly possessions during the time I awaited a bail hearing. "How long have you been wearing that thing, kid?" I didn't answer him. They told me my rights. I had the right to remain silent. I had the right to an attorney. I couldn't remember what else I had a right to do. I didn't have the right to talk to Abigail. I didn't have the right to go home. I wondered if I ever would. "Can you stand right here, please?" an officer asked. I don't know, I thought. Could I? Did I have the right to stand against the wall? A flash blazed and a camera recorded my tear-streaked face. The thought of it made me cry harder. They took me to a room with a large black window and a wooden table and sat me on a chair. Another officer, a different officer, came in and sat down across the table from me. "Do you understand why you're under arrest, son?" "Yeah, because I raped my girlfriend." Fresh tears fell down my cheeks when I said the words out loud. The officer sat back and folded his arms across his chest. "So you're confessing to that?" He raised his eyebrows. "Why?" "Because I couldn't stop. Why the heck else would I hurt my Abigail?" "That's not what I meant," the officer said. "Why are you confessing?" "Do you want me to lie?" "Most people do." "Well, I'm not going to lie, and I'm not going to try to deny that what I did was wrong." "Do you understand your girlfriend was only 15 years old?" "I am very aware of that," I growled. "That's why we were waiting." "Well, you didn't wait quite long enough, son. She's too young for that to have been consensual." There was nothing consensual about that, I said. She told me to stop, and I didn't. How much have you had to drink tonight? The officer asked. Too much, I answered, my voice taking on a snarky tone instigated by his rhetorical and irrelevant questions. Considering you're under 21, even a sip would be too much. He wrote something in a small notebook. Did you give Miss Johnson alcohol? I don't know. Maybe. Did you buy the alcohol? No. Who bought the alcohol? One of Wade's older brothers, I said. I don't know which one. They always buy the alcohol. How frequently is always? Every Saturday night. Why was I telling him all this? I had the right to remain silent. I didn't have to tell him any of this. Don't I have the right to an attorney? Yes, you do. The officer pursed his lips. Would you like to invoke that right? Yes, I think. The officer flipped shut his little reporter's notebook and shoved it into his pocket. I guess those are all the questions I'm going to ask right now. Is Abigail okay? I asked. Can I see her? I need to know she's okay. Son, I don't think you're going to see her for a very long time. The officer turned and walked from the room. Chapter 12. Advocate. Abigail. My name's Shannon. The woman's soft voice was a welcome change from the busy nurses and the cold doctor. She was like a comforting older sister. I'm here to support you to make sure you have everything you need. The alcohol must have been wearing off because I understood her well enough to know she wasn't drunk like my friends and I were. How can you help me? When all of this is over, you will have my number and can call me anytime you need me. Everything you say to me is confidential. I can't even tell your parents. No parents. I tried to sit up but felt dizzy and slumped back onto the hospital bed. My parents can't know about this. I'm sorry, but because you're a minor, the police called your parents. I know this all feels overwhelming. Do you think you're able to focus on yourself? If you want, I can go let your parents know they need to wait outside. Would that be okay? Nothing is going to be okay, I growled through my teeth. Why do you think that is? Shannon asked. I'm not hurt. I don't need to be here. I'm mad. Tell me why you're angry. Her soothing voice should have been more comforting. If only I knew that Kaelen was okay. Where's my boyfriend? Tears sprung to my eyes again. Are you worried about him? He didn't hurt me. I knew it was a lie the minute it fell from my lips. I wouldn't be here in this horrible emergency room if he hadn't hurt me. I started crying harder. Kaelen didn't mean to hurt me. I don't want him to get into trouble. Shannon didn't try to calm me down or tell me to stop crying. She merely put her hand close to mine. I took that as an invitation to grasp her hand like a lifeline. She let me cry. I needed to cry. She spoke softly. Abigail, I can tell you really care about Kaelen. Can you tell me why? He's the love of my life. I waited for her to tell me I was too young to be in love, but she didn't. I took that as an invitation to keep talking. He's the only person I've ever met who's smarter than me. Pulling my wrist closer, I showed her my bracelet. The red and yellow flames had frayed over the past 8 months, but the chemical equation was still clearly visible. I made us matching bracelets with the chemical equation for combustion because there was so much electricity between us, so much fire. He would never hurt me on purpose. I don't want him to go to jail. I can't promise you that they didn't take him to the county jail. I don't know if it makes you feel any better, but I've been in the jail with clients and it isn't anything like what you see on television. He doesn't belong there. He's going to get hurt. Believe it or not, he will be in a room with the deputies and always on camera. There isn't a corner that they won't be watching and protecting him. We'll still be here when they give him a big breakfast. He will have a lawyer, and there is a chance he could get out first thing in the morning. I can't make any promises, but I can call in the morning and let you know exactly what happened to him tonight and what the next steps are. I can even call to see where he is when the exam is over, if you'd like. I nodded. She made it sound better, but not talking to Kaelen was burning a hole in my heart. I needed to know that he wasn't mad at me. Okay, he did the wrong thing, but this isn't what I wanted to happen. I hated this. "Abigail," a nurse said from the doorway as she entered the little exam room, "your parents are here." The nurse straightened the white blanket that was draped over me. "No parents," I whimpered and gripped Shannon's hand, pleading up at her with my eyes. "They can't find out about this. If they're here, they must know. Do you want me to tell them that you'd prefer they wait outside?" "Don't leave me," I demanded, gripping her hand harder. "I won't." She stood near the head of my hospital bed, off to the side so my parents could get close to me. My mother rushed into the room without knocking. My father stood in the open door. "Oh, sweetie." My mom pulled me into her arms. Fresh tears flowed down my face, and I felt terrible that I'd put her through this. No parent should have to get the news that their daughter had been raped. How had I gotten myself into this mess? "Are you okay? Do I look okay?" Oops, harsh. I softened my tone. "No, Mommy, I'm not okay." "That man needs to pay for what he did to you," my dad growled almost unintelligibly. The nurse motioned for him to step inside and shut the door. "Trevor, we talked about this," Mom warned. "We're here to support our daughter, not get angry at that boy." "That boy is a man," Dad grumbled. I couldn't look at my dad. I didn't want to see his anger at the man I loved. I didn't want him to see the shame written all over my face. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I'm Shannon." Shannon stepped forward to introduce herself. "I'm a victim's advocate, and your daughter has asked me to sit with her through the exam. It's best if the parents wait outside." "Exam? No, no, no." "I'm Karen, and this is my husband, Trevor." They both shook her hand, and Mom sat on the edge of my bed. "Thank you so much for being here, but my daughter and I talk about everything." "I can see that you love Abigail, Mrs. Johnson, but if you want what's best for her, you need to allow her to focus on healing and on the exam. Right now, she's more worried about you than taking care of herself. I promise, we'll come get you when the exam is over and she's ready." "What kind of an exam?" I asked, suddenly nauseated. I glared up at this woman who promised to help me. My mother looked unsure. "Maybe I shouldn't leave her." "Mrs. Johnson, Abigail needs to be able to talk to the nurse and speak candidly. When she's ready, she can ask me to come get you. Let's focus on her health, okay? Is that what you want, Abigail?" "I guess." I didn't like the idea of answering questions in front of my mom. If she knew half the things I'd done leading up to that horrible incident, she'd be so mad at me. I made a split-second decision and the words came out of my mouth before I could retract them. "No, I don't want my mom in the room." "Okay." Mom smiled, that sweet, pitying smile that I hated because it reminded me that I was pitiful. Pitiful for getting myself into this mess. "I'm really tired," I said. "Can you maybe come back later?" "Sure, honey." Mom stood and placed a kiss on my forehead. "We'll be in the waiting room if you need us." "Thanks, Mom." I let her hug me, and my dad came and hugged me, mumbling something about me getting some rest. Whatever. I wasn't really tired. I just wanted them to leave. Shannon stepped away from my bed and I grabbed her arm. "Not you!" She turned back to me and I fought to maintain composure. "You promised you wouldn't leave," I said. Shannon pulled up a chair and held my hand in hers. "I won't. I'm right here." I took a deep, ragged breath and closed my eyes. Maybe I was tired. That or drunk. I wasn't sure which, but I left my eyes closed, just in case. Chapter 13. Let Me Help You. Kaelen. "Mr. Andrews, my name is Drake Leonard. A man young enough to be my older brother sat in front of me and set a digital recorder on the table, along with a notepad. "I'm the court-appointed attorney assigned to your case. How are you doing this morning?" "Mr. Leonard, no offense, but if you're smart enough to have a law degree, you should already know the answer to that question." "Rude of me?" "Yes." "Sorry? Not really. I haven't slept, I haven't eaten, I haven't showered, I have a serious headache and a hangover. Oh, and I raped my girlfriend last night. How the hell do you think I'm doing this morning?" Drake sat back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. The man was smart enough to know I was right. Good for him. "I understand you've already confessed to the crime, is that correct?" "There were 5 witnesses, Mr. Leonard. How difficult will this case be?" Put me in front of a judge, let me plead guilty, and lock me away for the rest of eternity. Is that really what you want? He raised his eyebrows. It's what I deserve, I grumbled. Do you, though? I wasn't sure where he was going with this, so I shut up. Did you walk into that bedroom intending to harm Miss Johnson? Of course not. I drew a circle on the table with one finger. Do you feel remorse for what you did? Absolutely. I looked him square in the eyes. Have you ever harmed another creature in your entire life? No. Are you in love with Miss Johnson? Yes, I said, tears fighting to the surface again. Then let me help you, Drake said, compassion in his voice. Okay. My voice was barely a squeak. Drake pulled a pen from the inside pocket of his sport coat and clicked it open. Do you know how old Miss Johnson is? If so, could you state her age, please? Abigail is 15. She'll be 16 on June 25th. Are you aware that the state of Michigan law prohibits 18-year-old men from engaging in sexual relations with girls under the age of 16? Yes. Prior to last night, have you ever engaged in intercourse with Miss Johnson? No, I choked out. I couldn't believe I was having to answer these questions. Our relationship was supposed to be special. We were supposed to be each other's first, one and only, and forever. Supposed to get married and grow old together. Did you enter that bedroom last night intending to have intercourse with Miss Johnson? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. For the record, can you tell me why your answer to that question is not definitive? Because I was drunk and I wasn't thinking clearly? Can you tell me how much you had to drink last night? Not really. I mean, maybe 5 or 6 beers. Did the arresting officers administer a breathalyzer test or check your blood alcohol level? No. Where did you obtain the alcohol? Wade's older brother bought a 24-pack of beer for us. Could you state his name for the record, please? Kent Matthews? Crap, I was going to get that dude in so much trouble. Wade will never forgive me for this. Was Mr. Andrews aware that minors would be drinking the alcohol he purchased? Yeah, he was partying with us. Did you personally hand any alcohol beverage to Miss Johnson, or did you in any way encourage her to drink alcohol? Maybe. Probably. Could you provide a timeline of events starting from the time you saw Miss Johnson and ending with the police officers arresting you? You're going to make me relive last night? I'm trying to keep you from going to prison for the rest of your life. Your choice. I picked Abigail up from her friend Sarah's house at 8 o'clock, and we drove to Wade's house. She told her parents she would be sleeping over at Sarah's. We arrived at Wade's house at about 8:15, ate pizza, drank beer, went downstairs to the game room, played a couple of rounds of pool. She beat me. Twice. I stopped and smiled lightly, remembering the good parts of the previous night. Drake took notes as I provided the recap, and when he realized I'd stopped, he looked up at me with raised eyebrows. Continue, please. On the other side of the game room, there's a big sectional couch, and several other couples were over there making out, so I asked Abby if she wanted to go over there and make out. And what was her response? She said yes, I said. Did she physically say the word yes? I don't know, man. Seriously, this is such crap. I can't believe I have to tell you all this. Was last night the first time you made out with Miss Johnson? Drake asked. Heck no. No, sir. We made out a lot, any chance we could get. Were her parents aware of her relationship with you? No, I said. Were your parents aware? No. Were your friends aware? He asked. Yes. Could you continue, please? We made out for a while, maybe half hour or more, I said. At any point during this time, were you touching any of her body parts that would normally be concealed beneath a swimsuit? Yes. At any point during this time, was Miss Johnson touching any of your body parts that would normally be concealed beneath a swimsuit? Drake asked. Yes, I whispered. I laid my forehead against the wooden table, wishing I could pound away my headache and make this interrogation stop. I didn't want to think about my sweet Abby having to answer these same questions from an interrogator. I wanted to puke or die or both. At what point did you decide to enter Mr. Matthews' bedroom? Drake said, when I knew I wasn't going to be able to stop. Did you ask Miss Johnson to go into the bedroom with you? Yes, I said. And what was her response? Did she physically say a definitive yes or no? Not really. More like, mm-hmm. And what happened after you entered the bedroom? Drake asked. She laid down on the bed, and I laid down on top of her, and somehow one of us must have removed her underwear, but I don't remember that happening. but I do remember lowering my sweatpants and... At any point, did you ask Miss Johnson if she was willing to engage in intercourse? No, I said. Did you think she wanted to engage in intercourse? If wrapping her legs around my waist counts, then yes. I raised my head from the table and glared at Drake. Prior to last night, had Miss Johnson ever expressed interest in having intercourse? Drake asked. Yes. Prior to last night, had you ever attempted to have intercourse with Miss Johnson? No, I said. Did you have intercourse with Miss Johnson last night? Yes. Did she ask you to stop? Drake asked. Yes. Did you stop? No, I said. No. I laid my head back on the table and sobbed. Chapter 14. Why? Abigail. That was the worst experience of my life, I grumbled, tossing my phone onto my bed and entering my adjoining bathroom. I'm so sorry you had to endure that, Mom said. That man will never be able to hurt you again. You're safe now. I glared at my mom. She didn't understand. I wasn't talking about what Kaelen had done to me. I was talking about the exam at the hospital. In that moment, I realized she would never understand. After shutting the door to the bathroom, I turned on the shower as hot as it would go and started stripping off the clothes Shannon had given me. What would I have done without her? She stood by my side the whole time, even through the embarrassing stuff. The longer the exam went, the more I sobered up, and the less I wanted to be alive and dealing with this nightmare. But she held my hand and explained things to me that didn't make sense. And then when it was all over and I stood there in my hospital gown wondering what I was going to wear home, she brought me soft, fluffy sweats and a sweatshirt. The police had taken my clothes. Good riddance. If those clothes had come home with me, I probably would have burned them. I shuddered. The hot shower burned my skin, and I cranked the handle until the temperature was cool enough to stand under the cascade of water and let the steam fill my lungs. My loofah sponge hung from a hook, and I doused it in body wash, then scrubbed every inch of my body until it was raw and red. How had last night gone so terribly wrong? Our first time was supposed to be perfect, not scary and painful. How could I face everyone at school on Monday? How could I rewrite my future to fit this new reality? How could I sit in the library at lunch without Kaelen there to study with me? How could I face the next however many months or years I had left to live knowing that what we'd done had landed Kaelen in jail? In jail? What would it be like in jail? My sweet, tender, loving Kaelen in jail. The love of my life in jail. Why? Why? I crumbled to the floor of the shower and sat there crying until the water ran cool and my tears ran down the drain along with my hope and my future. Chapter 15. Best Dad in the World. Kaelen. Mr. Andrews, I understand you're withdrawing your original confession, is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. My throat was hoarse from crying half the night, and I didn't know what else to say, so I just stood there in front of the judge. Could you explain your reason? The judge asked. I was inebriated and distraught from having hurt my girlfriend, and I wasn't thinking straight. I choked back sobs for what felt like the 100th time in the past 15 hours. If an 18-year-old man was old enough to be tried as an adult, old enough to purchase cigarettes, and old enough to join the military, he should be old enough to hold his emotions in check. Yet, for some reason, I couldn't. Your Honor, I've conferred with my client, determined that his original confession was given in haste, in utterance rather than a thought-out answer to the officer's questioning. As he regained sobriety, Counselor, his state of inebriation is a detriment, not an excuse for his behavior, the judge said. I could add drunk and disorderly conduct to his charge of criminal sexual conduct. I understand that, Your Honor, Drake Matthews continued. Mr. Andrews has been an exemplary student, in the top 10 of his class, an athlete, and has no prior criminal record. He understands the severity of his actions and feels remorse for what he's done. Your Honor, we had 5 witnesses come forward, the prosecuting attorney interrupted. None of whom were in the room at the time of the incident, Drake interjected, and all of whom were underage and inebriated. Gentlemen, it sounds like we are not going to come to an agreement in this matter today. Therefore, I'm setting bail at $50,000 and a pretrial hearing for May 25th. This court is in recess." The judge rapped a small wooden mallet on his bench and stood. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Floyd Clayton," the bailiff called out. Apparently, I'd cried enough tears for one day because all I felt was numb. Even after withdrawing my confession, the judge was still going to throw the book at me. The question was, how hard? Attorney Drake Leonard promised he'd work on my behalf to lessen the damage to my long-term freedom. My father listened patiently in the courtroom and hauled out his checkbook to bail me out of jail. I vowed to pay him back and make this up to him. Neither of us spoke on the drive home. When he entered our house, my dad threw his keys in the little tray by the door and walked into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator door but just stood there. He spoke for the first time. "Are you hungry?" "No, sir," I mumbled and slipped off my shoes. "Where's Mom?" "At Aunt Stacy's. She'll be home tomorrow. She thought you and I could use some time alone." Translation: she didn't want to look her son in the eye and acknowledge that he'd raped his girlfriend. What mother wants to admit that? "Do you want to talk about it?" Dad asked, leaning against the kitchen island. "Not really." My throat caught again. "Maybe later?" "Why don't you lay down for a while? You probably didn't get much sleep last night." "I didn't get any sleep," I mumbled, and then started toward the stairs. On the second step, I turned and met his gaze. "Thanks, Dad." I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for. Recognizing I needed sleep? That I needed some time to process all that had happened? That I wasn't ready to talk? Bailing me out of jail? Not yelling at me? Just being there? Probably all of it. I trudged up the stairs to my room. On my bookshelf, I found my secondhand copy of Applied Behavior Analysis, which I'd picked up as a memorial of our first date in the library, and opened the section on operant conditioning. Removing Abigail's friendship bracelet from the pocket of my sweats, I tucked the frayed yellow and red embroidery thread within the pages. The chemical equation stared up at me with its 2H2 gaseous plus O2 gaseous yields 2H2O gaseous, reminding me that when you play with fire, you're bound to get burned. I closed the book and placed it back on the shelf. I walked over to my bathroom and turned the shower as hot as it would go. I stripped off my clothes and shoved them in the garbage can beside the toilet. After tying a knot in the bag, I tossed the bag into my bedroom and pulled the door shut again. I adjusted the shower temperature so it wouldn't burn me and scrubbed every inch of my body, trying to remove the horror of the past 18 hours. I finally just laid my head against the wall and stood there until the water ran cold and I turned off the shower. When I entered my bedroom, the bag of garbage had been removed, and there was a protein shake and a water bottle on the stand beside my bed. All I could think was that I had the best dad in the world. I climbed under the covers and rolled into a ball, then cried myself to sleep. Chapter 16. Flammable. Abigail. Rescue me. I wasn't sure who I was talking to. Well, thinking to. I didn't know if I believed in a higher power, a god or a spirit or whatever name religious people wanted to call it, or him or her or whatever. I was talking to my own ceiling, or thinking to it anyway. I have nothing left. I'm forgotten, hopeless, broken, lost. I refused to go back to school. None of my so-called friends even called to check on me. I'd removed myself from every social media account I'd ever created because people were either bad-mouthing the man I loved as if he were a child predator, or they were bad-mouthing me, calling me a slut or a whore or a snitch. They blamed me for losing their star pitcher. They said if only I hadn't gone into that bedroom with Kaelen, he wouldn't have raped me. If only I hadn't cried, no one would have heard me. Guilt overpowered my thoughts. If only I hadn't lied to my parents and told them I was staying over at Sarah's. If only I hadn't gone to that party and drunk any alcohol. If only I hadn't been making out with him so passionately, with my hand down his pants and my bra off. If only I hadn't let him touch me everywhere. But I had loved every second of it. Why did I have to cry out in pain? We could have endured a few minutes of crying together, and I could have yelled at him and maybe punched him so he would know he'd hurt me. And then we probably would have tried again. When I closed my eyes and let myself wander back to the moments just prior to the pain, Everything had been as I'd imagined our first time would be. Every touch, every kiss, the warmth that had radiated through the center of my body, reaching out into every limb to the tips of my fingers and toes. Up until those few horrible seconds, Kaelen wasn't raping me. He was making love to me. With every movement of his body, with every touch of his hands, with every kiss that reached into my soul. We were both drunk. We were both stupid. We were both hungry for each other. We were both making love. Together. 100% together. 100% willing. So why was he taken in handcuffs to jail and I was lying here almost 4 weeks after that horrible night, feeling sick to my stomach, depressed, haunted, alone? No one asked me how I felt about what happened. They just assumed that I hated Kaelen for what he'd done, that I was safe now, that he couldn't hurt me anymore, that I was a victim and he was the perpetrator. Yes, I was a victim, but he was too. He lost all the same things I lost. We both lost each other. We both lost our virginities. We both lost the one chance to have our first time. And we both lost the future we had planned. We had planned to take on the world together, solving problems with science and reason and logic, side by side, hand in hand. I lifted my hands and noticed again the orange and yellow stripe of flame still clinging to my wrist. The chemical equation that represented the fire that burned between us. 2H2 gaseous plus O2 gaseous yields 2H2O gaseous. As they'd been doing for several weeks, my eyes were drawn to the ceiling above my bed. The ceiling where I had painstakingly painted the entire periodic table of the elements the summer between 7th and 8th grade. My eyes kept bouncing back and forth between the chemical symbols for hydrogen and oxygen as I thought about how combining these simple elements in different ways could lead either to the most important substance needed to sustain life, water, or lead to something as destructive and powerful as fire and steam, combustion. Hydrogen gas is highly flammable. Depending on the concentrations and combinations with other elements and the amount of supplied heat, explosive reactions have known to happen. Kaelen was hydrogen gas, and I was just the right amount of heat. They said I was too young to know what real love means, how being in love feels. They said that time heals all wounds, that my world would go back to normal, a new normal. If it's a new normal, then how can it be normal? When exactly was this new normal supposed to happen? Because 4 weeks later, I wasn't feeling better. I was feeling worse. My body ached. I felt sick. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed and did nothing for hours, days, weeks. My parents probably should have taken me to a doctor or something. We all probably would have figured out sooner why I felt like absolute crap all the time. Then maybe my condition wouldn't have come out of nowhere, punching me in the gut, flipping my world upside down for the second time in less than a month. We should have known. Chapter 17. Happy Father's Day. Kaelen. Kaelen, you've got a card or something. The guard with the mail cart handed me the envelope. Several hundred inmates, just like me, sat on benches, leaning over tables, scraping plastic silverware across styrofoam plates, talking over the din of the echo from the large cafeteria. No return address? I turned the unsealed envelope over in my hand. We never received unopened mail. A total violation of our privacy. We'd given up all rights to privacy the minute we'd been convicted. Heck, the minute we committed the crimes. "Who's it from, dude?" Orlando asked. He didn't get any mail that day. He usually didn't. Neither did I. From my mom once a week and Wade every few months, but that was it. "No idea," I said, slipping the greeting card from the envelope. I turned it over and opened it up. 3 words. No signature. 3 words that changed my life. I read them aloud in a shocked whisper. Happy Father's Day. "Father's Day isn't for 3 months, dude," Orlando said. "What'd your old man do, send it back? Is he that mad at you that he wouldn't even accept a card from you for Father's Day?" "I didn't send my dad a card for Father's Day." I kept mulling over those 3 words as Orlando continued his chastisement. What kind of a jerk doesn't send his dad a card for Father's Day? The kind of jerk who rapes his girlfriend and gets put in prison for 5 years? Yep, you are an idiot. Orlando patted me on the back and took another bite of his food. I continued staring at those 3 words. Happy Father's Day. There had to be some mistake. I looked at the outside of the envelope again. Typewritten and clearly addressed to me. No return address. The postmark was from Muncie, Indiana. I didn't know anyone from Indiana. Heck, I didn't know anyone at all anymore. The only people who came to visit me were Wade and my parents. For 7 long months I'd been isolated in this concrete prison. Only 4 years and 5 months left to go. As far as I was concerned, my jail sentence started 9 months ago, the day my best friend was ripped from my arms by my own stupidity. 9 months. My heart pounded and my stomach plummeted. I dropped the card on the table in front of me, horrified. 9 months. It had been just over 9 months since the day I raped my girlfriend. I know who sent me the card, I whispered. Chapter 18. Help Me Find Her. Kaelen. Wade, you've got to help me find her. This minimum security prison allowed visitors once a month, and I'd sent multiple letters begging Wade to come. I couldn't tell him about this through the mail. Heck, I couldn't even tell him now. Wade connected the dots immediately. He held the card in his hand, staring at those 3 words just as I'd done. She moved at the end of the school year, man. Nobody knows where she went. Obviously Muncie, Indiana. I pointed to the envelope. What do you want me to do, drive to Indiana? Muncie's a rather large city. Ask her friends, I said. Somebody has to know how to reach out to her. 16-year-old girls don't just drop off the face of the earth. Check social media accounts. Ask her old cheerleading coach. I don't know. Think of something. What are you going to do if you find her? Wade asked. You're legally not allowed to reach out to her. Victims have rights, you know. Yeah, well, fathers have rights too. A father would have been there holding her hand when she gave birth to his kid, not locked in jail because he raped the baby's mother, Wade said. Yeah, well, if she hadn't cried out, I would have been there when the baby was born. Don't you dare blame this on Abigail, Wade snarled at me. She told you to stop. I heard her with my own ears. I was there that night, remember? I remember that night very well, thank you very much. I ruined what should have been the best night of our lives. I pounded my fist on the table. One of the guards glared at me from across the room and I sighed. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I was still banking on getting out of here early for good behavior. Neither of us spoke for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. What am I supposed to do, man? Desperate tears were close to the surface. I don't know, dude. Don't you have some sort of court-assigned attorney or something? Some advocate? Counselor? Yeah, I've got a counselor. I stared off into the far corner, my eyes unfocused, my head swimming in confusion. I'll go talk to her. Will you please try to find Abigail? I turned my pained expression to my best friend. I'll ask around, Wade said. Don't get your hopes up. She wouldn't have reached out to me if she didn't want me to know, right? I guess. Wade, I love Abigail so dang much, I said. You can't even imagine. I was planning to marry her. She was 15, dude. I planned to wait for her. You didn't wait for her that night, Wade mumbled. Please just find her for me. My voice rose with emotion. I didn't want to cry in front of my best friend, or anyone else for that matter. This sent me over the edge. Somewhere in Muncie, Indiana, the girl I loved was holding my baby. I don't even know if we had a boy or a girl. Tears ran down my face again for the millionth time. Wade pulled me into a hug, and he fought tears as well. I'll see what I can do. Thanks, man. Chapter 19. Ask him, not me. Kaelen. Oh! Abigail brought both hands over her mouth in shock, and her eyes widened. I held up my hands in surrender to show her I wouldn't hurt her. She was sitting at a table in the Ball State University library, with books and notebooks spread out in front of her. This was finals week, and I felt terrible bothering her, but I couldn't wait any longer. "Do you mind if I sit down?" The table was large enough that there was a substantial distance between us. I hoped that would help her feel safe. She removed her hands from her mouth and placed them on the table, fingers splayed out as if she was trying to hold the table in place. She was shaking. "I'll stay way over here," I said, resting my hands on top of the chair in front of me. "I won't hurt you, Abigail." "I'm not afraid of you," she snapped. "Sit down." Gratefully, I pulled out the chair and lowered myself onto it, placing my hands on the table where she could see them. "Would you relax?" she said, her voice softer. "I told you I'm not afraid of you." "Can I ask you a question?" I lowered my shoulders and took a deep breath, trying to believe that she wasn't afraid of me. She said it twice. "Before I spend the next hour begging for your forgiveness?" "Well, I'll put you out of your misery right now and let you know that I forgave you a long time ago. I suspect I already know what your question is, but go ahead and ask." I took another shaky breath and whispered, "Boy or girl?" "Jaden is the most adorable little boy you'll ever meet in your life." The reverence in her voice caused me to lean forward and hold my head in my hands as tears streamed unabashedly down my face. "I have a son. Jaden, I have a son. I missed everything. Bottles, diaper changes, rocking chairs, first words, first steps, birthdays. I knew exactly how old he was, within a few days anyway. After crying for several minutes, I finally choked out, 'I'm sorry.' 'Don't be,' she said. I lifted my head in confusion, not hiding my red, puffy eyes and tear-streaked face. That 4.5-year-old little boy is the greatest gift in my life." I started crying again. 4 years, 3 months, and 15 days, give or take. I don't know his birthday. February 1st. Everything she said was emotionless, as if she was talking to a friend about the weather. "Wow, exactly 9 months. What are the odds?" "Pretty good, actually. After thousands of years of having children, scientists have figured out the exact gestational period. There's a reason why they give you a due date." "They didn't give me a due date," I mumbled. "Was my card the first you heard about him?" Abigail cocked her head to the side. "You honestly didn't know?" "Abby, no one told me anything. People kept saying I had no right to ask about you. After several months," I shrugged and had to look away, "I stopped asking." "All it took was several months to forget about me?" Her voice wavered. "Forget about you?" My head snapped back to look at her. "How could you ask that? I think about you all day. I dream about you every night. And when I'm not thinking about you, I'm thinking about our son." My voice caught and I had to stop. "I thought you said you didn't know he was a boy." She raised her eyebrows. "The card was blue," I said. "I assumed." "Good assumption," she said. "That's why I chose blue." "My counselor got me a present after I cried in her office for days on end," I chuckled. "A box of Kleenex," she guessed. "You know those baby dolls that you get for home economics class? The ones that cry if you set them down for too long?" She pursed her lips, stifling a laugh, knowing where I was heading with this story. "They wouldn't let me carry the little guy around with me, so she didn't program the doll or anything, but she let me come into her office every day and talk through my pain and stuff." I drew circles on the table with my finger, not sure whether to laugh or cry. "I did research. She got me this book called What to Expect the First Year, and I read it cover to cover. And then I started over and read a few pages a day so I could get an idea of what you were going through at each stage." I realized I was staring off into space as my voice trailed off, remembering that dark first year. "That's really kind of sweet, Kaelen." We held each other's gaze for a minute. "I'd pretty much written you off. Figured I'd never hear from you again. When did you get out?" "Yesterday." "Yesterday?" She sat forward in shock, her mouth gaping. "Sorry it took me so long to get here. I didn't dare speed. I'm going to be on probation for the rest of eternity. I'm probably violating several probation restrictions, just crossing the state line and talking to you right now, but I had to see you. I got here as fast as I could."
Drove through the night.
You didn't even go home before coming here?
Yeah, I had to get my car and clothes and stuff. I drained my old savings account to get enough money to last a few months. My mom was livid that I refused to at least stay the night. They didn't want me to come here at all. Said you wouldn't want to see me and would call the police if I came near you. I told them I'd been away from you too long already and I wasn't waiting one more day to at least try to see you.
How did you even find me?
My best friend Wade is a great amateur private detective.
So you had him spy on me. She sat back and folded her arms across her chest.
He tried for a really long time to even find someone who would tell him where you were.
No one knew where I had gone.
I told him that 16-year-old girls don't just drop off the face of the earth. Check social media. Ask every one of her friends, her cheerleading coach. Keep asking until he found someone.
And did he find someone?
No.
Because I didn't tell anyone. So how did he find me?
Your dad was a physics professor when you lived in Big Rapids. So he started researching colleges in and around Muncie, Indiana, and finally found your dad on Ball State College's website as a professor in the physics department.
From Abigail's facial expression, I couldn't tell if she was angry or trying not to laugh. And
you made the dean's list every semester for the past 3 years?
Keep going.
I figured you would choose a major in the behavioral sciences, so he researched the classes in that department, and we figured this was the library you would most likely be studying in.
What made you think I'd be in a library?
You were always in the library at school, I said. When you weren't at cheer practice or hanging out with me, I could always find you in the library.
That's where you found me on the first day of school, she said.
But not where I saw you for the first time. All the football players were watching the cheerleaders, so it wasn't like I was the only one gawking. But you were the only cheerleader I could see,
and the only one you couldn't ask out.
You were completely off limits. I'm surprised I didn't get kicked off the football team when the coach suspected I was seeing you on the down low weeks later.
The star quarterback doesn't usually get kicked off the football team unless he does something really bad. We both stopped talking and our eyes bore into each other's across the table, challenging the other to come right out and say it, like the reason the star pitcher got kicked off the baseball team a few months later.
I tried to stay away, I really did. But when I saw you reaching for that book on the top shelf, I couldn't help grabbing it for you. And then I had to ask why you needed a book about applied behavior analysis.
She chuckled. And we sat and talked about theories for an hour and missed lunch. And then the librarian came over and sat with us for a while after that. And then we missed fourth hour, and she had to write us a pass.
I think we both know what happened after that, I said.
The best 8 months of my life, she suggested.
I nodded slowly. Mine too.
They wouldn't let me see you, Kaelen. They wouldn't let me get a message to you. They wouldn't let me testify. They wouldn't let me tell my side of the story. Abigail covered her face with her hands and started bawling. I hurried around the table and knelt beside her, pulling her into my arms, letting her cry on my shoulder. If anyone in the library noticed us, no one said anything. I held her, and she cried. Her hair smelled exactly as I remembered it. The shape of her body in my arms was as familiar as if the past 5 years hadn't happened. She climbed down into my arms and I sat back hard onto the floor, pulling her tight to me and almost rocking back and forth, comforting her like a little girl.
It's okay, Abby, I said. I'm here now. I'm never leaving you again. I promise.
Why did you plead guilty? She pulled away slightly and looked at me, the most pained expression torturing her face. She started pounding her fists into my chest. You shouldn't have pleaded guilty. They took you away from me.
I had to.
You did not have to. She shoved me hard, taking out 5 years of aggression. You were not guilty.
What I did was wrong.
What you did was love me. You loved me more than I've ever been loved by another person.
I still love you.
I took her face in my hands, brushing her tears away as best I could. But Abigail, there were witnesses. I couldn't deny what I'd done. I wouldn't have even tried to justify my actions.
The only reason anyone knew about it at all was because I told you to stop. Don't you blame this on yourself, Abigail Johnson. You were the victim, not me." "Oh, really?" She folded her arms across her chest. "Did you or did you not just spend the past 5 years in prison because of what we did that night? We, not you. We did that. And you were the one who spent the next 5 years paying the price for what we did. How does that not make you the victim, too?" I didn't know how to answer that. "Do you know what would have happened if no one had heard me that night?" I shook my head and kept my mouth shut. "We would have cried about it and talked about it and apologized to each other and kissed, and then we probably would have made love again." She shrugged and her voice lowered, a little more carefully the second time. "You have nothing to apologize for," I said. "Really? Are you sure about that?" She folded her arms across her chest. I wasn't sure about anything. I sat back against the bookshelf beside the table, still with her on my lap. What had we been doing for the half an hour before? "No means no, Abby. Did you ever one time hear me say the word no to you?" "I don't remember," I answered honestly. "I said stop. There's a difference." "I should have stopped," I whispered. Could you have stopped? The smug look on her face told me not to respond to her rhetorical question. If I watched a freight train coming from a mile away and at the last minute stepped in front of it, held up my hand and yelled, "Stop!" do you think that train would hit me? I didn't call her out for raising her voice, or even look around to see if anyone in the library heard her. "I should never have stepped on that train track," she said definitively. "Don't blame yourself for what I did." "Oh, I blame both of us," she said. "And you know who else I blame?" "Who?" I whispered. "Every one of our friends who were also drinking that night. We were all underage, and furthermore, who bought the alcohol for us?" "One of Wade's brothers." If one of us had crashed our car on the way home from that party, would one of them have gotten in trouble? "Kent spent 90 days in jail," I said. "But we drank that alcohol. No one poured that down our throats." That was the biggest mistake of our lives. That. Drinking that first sip of alcohol, because everything else that happened from the minute the alcohol entered our bloodstream is clouded by the fact that we had alcohol in our bloodstream. You're talking to a behavioral science major. I know. "I don't doubt you for a second." "I couldn't go back to school." She slouched and I pulled her closer. She laid her head on my shoulder. Her voice took on that monotone, cold, unfeeling sound again, as if she had cried too much already and didn't have any tears left to give. "There were only 5 weeks left, and no one insisted I go back. Thankfully, I had perfect scores on everything, so even if I didn't go back, I wouldn't have failed my freshman year of high school. But the teachers sent some work home for me, and I kept my grades." "I forget how young you were," I sighed. "You're so intelligent that your age never seemed to matter." "Except in a court of law." Sarcasm dripped from her voice, and we were both quiet for a minute. "Anyway, I suspected pretty quickly. A few weeks after, I didn't start." "What did you do?" "Asked my mom if I could go stay with my grandma for the summer. Told her I couldn't stand to see everyone or talk to anyone. You know what really bothered me, though?" She looked at me with sad eyes. "What?" I brushed her hair off her forehead. "Driving past the McDonald's where you always used to stop and buy me a Diet Coke and end up getting yourself a Big Mac." I snorted. "Haven't had one of those in 5 years." "And the movie theater where we used to pretend to watch movies?" "Making out in the back row of the theater was pretty fun." My voice grew husky. "And I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you too." I kissed the top of Abigail's head. "So what happened when you got to your grandma's?" "She figured it out immediately." "She did?" I pulled back and looked down at her. "How?" "I was puking every morning," she said. "Too bad your counselor didn't get you the book What to Expect When You're Expecting." "Yeah, well, I didn't know we were expecting," I grumbled. "My grandma had to tell my parents. Because, I was a minor. What did they do? My dad called his buddy, who happens to be the chair of the physics department at Ball State, told him we wanted to move closer to Dad's mom, and he had a job for the fall semester lined up pretty quickly. They sold the house in Big Rapids, and we moved down here. You just disappeared. It was better that way. For whom? I pulled her away from my body and looked firmly into her eyes. I couldn't find you. I'm pretty sure you weren't legally allowed to be looking for me. I'm pretty sure you're right. I tucked her close again. What did you do about school? I homeschooled. She chuckle-snorted. That turned out to be a really good choice, because I flew through the basics and started into college before Jaden's first birthday. I'm almost done with my undergrad. I'm really proud of you, I said. What about you? Abigail shifted so she was sitting cross-legged in front of me. I stretched out my legs to get the kinks out from having her sit on my lap. Did you do any online classes or anything? Yeah, after the first couple years of wallowing in depression, I realized if I was ever going to make myself worthy of you and our baby, I'd better get my act together. I've got a few semesters done, but I haven't finished a degree or anything. Just basics out of the way, really. I can recommend a good college, she joked, glancing up and around the library. You wouldn't think I was stalking you by coming to the same college? I picked at a piece of lint on the carpet beside my leg. What about your parents? Are they going to freak out when they learn you talk to me? You can ask them yourself, Abigail said with defiance. That's going to be a fun conversation, I grumbled. My dad and mom will come around when they realize how I feel about you. And how do you feel about me? I was cautiously optimistic about her answer. I'm madly in love with you, she said. Well, I'm madly in love with you too. I put my hand on her knee and drew circles with my thumb. So where does that leave us? I want you to meet Jaden, she said. Really? I can meet him? I almost jumped off the floor with anticipation. You're his father, Abigail shrugged as if I didn't have any reason to be nervous. What does he know about me? You'll have to ask him. She pushed herself off the floor and dusted off her backside, which was very distracting. She reached a hand down to help me up, but I pulled her down onto my lap. I've been wanting to kiss you for about 5 years. How do you feel about that? I wanted her to take the lead on pretty much everything. I'd gotten into enough trouble already. In answer to my question, Abigail leaned forward and placed a very chaste kiss on my lips, and I sighed with contentment. Come on, let's go meet your son. Chapter 20. My Favorite Treat. Kaelen. Hi, Haley, Abigail said, walking past a girl sitting on a sofa in the living room. Hey, Abby, how you doing? Haley barely glanced up from the book she was reading. Jaden's out back with my dad. Abigail stopped and chuckled, then looked over her shoulder at me. Haley's supposedly Jaden's babysitter, but he usually spends more time with her dad than with her. Haley must have just realized I was there because she set her book aside and quickly rose from the sofa. You didn't tell me you had a friend with you. Did you want me to keep Jaden for a few more hours? Are you on a date? No, we just started talking in the library at the college. Abigail turned around and introduced us. Haley, this is my friend Kaelen. Nice to meet you, Haley. I half waved, then shoved my hand into my pocket again, not wanting to walk across the room to shake the young girl's hand. Oh my gosh. Haley's jaw dropped and I sighed. That didn't take long. Yes, he looks just like you, Abigail said, rolling her eyes. Everyone who meets you is going to figure it out immediately, so there's no reason to try to hide it. Okay, I mumbled, holding Abigail's gaze rather than glancing at her teenage babysitter. You and I will talk later. Abigail turned to Haley, pointing at her like a scolding mother. I've kept my son away from his father long enough, and I want them to meet. I raised my eyebrows at the way she turned the situation around, but followed her to the back of the house and out a sliding glass door. The yard behind the house was the size of a football field, and 4-year-old Jaden chased a man around, trying to snatch the football from him. Coach! Abigail called out. The man stood to look in our direction. Can my friend throw the ball around with you guys for a few minutes? Sure, the man called back. Just then, little Jaden plowed into him, knocking the unsuspecting coach to the ground. Ouch, that had to hurt, I said. He'll be fine. Abigail waved her hand dismissively and then turned to me and laid her hand on my arm. By the way, Jaden knows your name, and he'll figure it out almost as quickly as Haley. So maybe throw the ball around for a minute before introducing yourself. Jaden tore the ball from the man's arms and held it up like a trophy. I got the ball, Mom! You're going to make a great defensive lineman someday, Abigail called back. I want to be a quarterback, Jaden said. Why don't you show me that arm, buddy? I stepped down 2 steps off the porch and walked slowly but confidently toward Jaden. Go long, Jaden said in the sweetest little 4-year-old voice. Okay. I turned and pretended to run away from him and then looked over my shoulder in a ready position just as Jaden released the ball, which didn't go nearly as far as he probably would have liked. I turned and dove, barely catching the ball as I landed in the grass, all knees and elbows. Gotcha! Jaden tackled me even though I was already down. Dude, you're not supposed to tackle me. I'm on your side. I picked him up and tickled him and then set him on the grass. Coach is on defense. We got to tackle him. Let's get him. Jaden lowered his brow and crouched forward, running as fast as his little legs allowed. I'm ready for you this time, Coach called back, lowering himself to prepare for the block. We ran toward him, and when he got close enough, Coach yanked Jaden off the ground and flew him like an airplane. Jaden lifted his chin and thrust his arms out to the sides and made a whirring sound, mimicking a jet engine. When I got close enough for Coach to see my face, he stopped short and held Jaden over his shoulders like a sack of potatoes. Oh, wow. Yeah, apparently we look a lot alike. I shoved my hands into my pockets. Kind of felt like I'd done that a lot today. Have you met him yet? Coach asked. No, I just got into town a few minutes ago and Abigail brought me straight over here. Well, you're in for a real treat. This is the best little guy in the world. Coach shifted Jaden off his shoulder and into his arms. We get treats? Jaden turned to Coach with wide eyes. Yes, I'm going inside to make us a treat, and you can keep playing football with this nice young man. Okay, Coach. Jaden squirmed to get down, and Coach set him on his feet. I crouched in front of him so I was at eye level and held the football in my hands. How are you doing, Jaden? I'm good. How are you? This has been one of the best days of my life. Me too! His eyes grew wide with excitement. I got to play football with Coach, and he's making me treats. What kind of treats do you think he's going to make? I don't know, maybe apples and peanut butter? I love apples and peanut butter. I held the football in front of him. Is football your favorite sport? I'm good at every sport, Jaden said, but Coach is a football coach, and he teaches me everything I need to know. I'm good at every sport too, I told him. Every sport? Jaden looked into my eyes with wonderment on his face. Pretty much. I wondered if this was the moment he'd recognize me. I held my breath. Jaden cocked his head to the side and creased his brow. I could almost see the gears shifting in his intelligent expression. I waited and finally asked in a soft voice, Do you know who I am? He blinked a couple of times, still pondering. What's your name? My name is Kaelen, I whispered. His face changed. I wasn't even sure how to describe his expression. I wasn't sure if he was angry, excited, scared, happy, shocked. He didn't answer me with words, just threw his arms around my neck and held me. My tears fell on my cheeks as I sat down hard in the grass, pulling him onto my lap. I never thought I'd see you again, he said. I didn't correct him that we'd never met, just rocked him in my arms. I'm so glad to finally meet you, I said. Abigail joined us and sat next to me in the grass. I didn't even try to hide my tears from her. Hey, sweetie, did you have a fun afternoon with Coach? Yeah, and look who I got to meet. Jaden put one hand on each side of my face and tried to turn my face toward Abigail. Who is that guy, Jaden? He's my daddy. He scrunched up his face. You should know that, Mommy. I do know that, she said. I'm glad you finally have the chance to meet him. You're going to stay forever now, right? I'm certainly going to try, buddy. Good, because Coach is going to make us our favorite treat. Jaden pushed off my lap and ran toward the house. Coach, Haley, I got to meet my daddy. Thank you for bringing me here, I said to Abigail. Thank you for coming, she whispered. I pressed my forehead against hers and just held her, crying on the grass in the backyard of her babysitter's house after meeting my son. Chapter 21. Show Me Your Arm. Kaelen. So, Kaelen, what brings you to Muncie? Coach Reese asked. He dipped an apple slice in a pile of peanut butter and stuffed the whole thing into his mouth, passing the proverbial baton across the table. I looked at Abigail, not sure what, if anything, she'd told them about me. I decided to be vague. I came to visit Abigail. We were separated before I moved to Muncie, Abigail quickly added, glancing over at Jaden. Kaelen didn't know about anything that happened after I moved here. Ah, Coach pursed his lips and raised his eyebrows, quickly putting the pieces together. She hadn't told me about Jaden until a few hours ago. Well, I'm glad you're here now. Me too! Jaden abandoned his spot on the chair beside me and climbed into my arms, wrapping his sticky apple and peanut butter covered hands around my neck. Oh, Jaden! Abigail stood and hurried across the kitchen to wet down a washcloth with warm water from the sink. She leaned close to me and wiped each of Jaden's hands and then my neck. You can't just climb on people like that, honey. I really don't mind. My voice lowered and I gazed up at her, watching her clean our son's little face. She finally met my gaze, and I almost thought she was going to lean down and kiss me, with Haley and her dad sitting right there. Abigail stepped away and reached for Jaden's plate. Are you done eating? No! Jaden grabbed his plate and dragged it closer so he could sit on my lap and finish his snack. You gonna share these? I wrapped one arm around him and with the other hand reached for an apple slice. As I started to bring the slice toward my mouth, Jaden grabbed my wrist. You need to dip it in the peanut butter first. Oh gosh, I almost skipped that part. I made a show of dipping the apple into the peanut butter and then popping the slice into my mouth. That's really good. So what university do you attend, Kaelen? Coach asked. Actually, I've only gotten a few semesters in at a community college back in Michigan. I reached for a napkin to wipe the apple off my fingers. I was just talking to Abigail about possibly transferring down here to Ball State. Yes! Jaden cheered and raised both fists in the air. You can live with me and Mommy at Grandma and Grandpa's house. I chuckled nervously. Oh, I don't think your Grandma and Grandpa would have room for me, but I'm sure I can rent an apartment close by. Maybe you can visit me there. We could buy some toys and balls, and you can teach me how to play every sport. You said you already know how to play every sport. Jaden creased his brow and reached for another apple slice. Well, yeah, but I've never played sports with you before. True. Jaden thought about that for a few seconds and then asked, What's your favorite sport? Probably football. I reached for another slice. How about you? I played t-ball this spring, but you can't tackle anyone in t-ball, so I guess I like football best, just like you. Did you play any sports in high school, Kaelen? Coach Reese asked. Yeah, football, basketball, and baseball. What positions? Coach asked. Quarterback, forward, and pitcher. He was really good, Abigail said. He's being modest. What he should have said was star quarterback, top shooter, and starting pitcher. I'm surprised you didn't go on to play in college. Coach narrowed his eyes and cocked his head to the side. Big guy like you? No recruiters snatched you up? No scholarship offers? It's complicated, I muttered and lowered my gaze, tracing the pattern on the tablecloth with one finger. You still got an arm? Coach asked. That's not something people lose unless they have an injury. Yeah, probably. I haven't thrown in a long time. Well, I say we go out back and you show me and Jaden how good your arm is. Yes, show me your arm. Jaden turned all the way around in my lap and lifted the sleeve of my t-shirt to expose my biceps. You have very big muscles. I playfully flexed the muscle his hands were wrapped around and he giggled. Do it some more. He giggled again. I'm going to have muscles that big someday, too. I bet you will, buddy. I kissed the top of his head. Let's see what those muscles can do. Coach pushed his chair away from the table, and Jaden squirmed to get down and then turned around to help me up. I guess we're playing more football, I said to Abigail. Show Coach everything you've got, Abigail said with a serious tone. Trust me on this. I trust you on everything. Since only Haley was still in the kitchen, I chanced a quick kiss from Abigail, and I sensed that wouldn't be our last. There was no doubt in my mind. I was never leaving Muncie, Indiana again. Time to start shopping for apartments. Chapter 22. Walk On. Abigail. Talk, sister, Haley said as soon as the sliding glass door closed behind the boys. There's not much I can say. I watched through the slider as Jaden chased Kaelen down the expansive lawn away from the house. He's here now, and that's all that matters. You never told him you were pregnant, did you? I couldn't, I answered honestly. Haley would take that to mean I didn't have the courage to tell him, when in reality, I was legally not allowed to reach out to him, and he might even be in violation of probation just by standing in the yard with our son. If I had a hunk like that as my baby daddy, I would be bragging to the world, Haley said. I gawked at her. How old are you? 16, Haley giggled. And you're joking about having a baby daddy? I asked, a combination of annoyance and disgust clouding my tone. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to have a child at the age of 16? I was totally kidding. Do you know how old I am? I asked. She squirmed in her seat. No. I'm 20. Do the math. You were 16 when you had Jaden? Understanding filled Haley's eyes. I didn't mean to make light of that. You seem a lot older than 20. You grow up real fast when you become a mom, no matter how old. Why didn't you tell Kaelen you were pregnant? He's obviously crazy about you, and you're crazy about him, and he seems to like Jaden. He doesn't seem like the type of guy to make you get an abortion or something. It's complicated, I said. That's what he said a few minutes ago. Please just leave it at that and don't push me for more details. We never broke up, and we never wanted to break up. We were planning to get married when I got old enough. Being apart was not by either of our choosing. I won't bug you about it again, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Thank you. I appreciate that. For now, nothing's going to change. I'm not moving in with him or anything. Haley stood to look over my head, distracted by something in the backyard. Can he really throw from that far away? I turned to see what she was looking at, and my jaw hung open just as Kaelen threw a perfect spiral that landed cleanly in Coach's hands from about 50 or 60 yards away. I guess so, Haley said. Dad's going to want Kaelen as a walk-on. Coach had asked earlier about recruiters and scholarships, but there was one other chance a player had to join a team if he walked into the first practice and tried out. We both left the kitchen and made our way onto the deck. Coach turned to look at us and held the ball in his hand. I want him as a walk-on. Chapter 23. Promise her, not me. Kaelen. Bring it in, guys, Coach called from up near the house. I felt as if I was on a football team again, which was kind of fun. I looked down at Jaden and raised my eyebrows. Beat you to the house? I challenged. Jaden took off running and I called after him. No fair, you got a head start. I made a show of running almost neck and neck, and Jaden pushed harder to keep ahead of me. Right before we got close to Coach, I purposely beat him and then fell to the ground, panting as if that had been a stretch. Jaden piled on top of me as if he had single-handedly tackled me to the ground. Yeah, Abigail was right. He was going to make a good linebacker. Haley, will you do me a favor? Coach asked, turning to his daughter. Could you get Jaden his bath? Because he's going to fall asleep on the way home, and I don't want Abigail to have to wake him up and try to give him a bath when he's cranky. I need to have a talk with Jaden's mom and dad real quick. Come on, Jaden. Haley held out her hand. Let's go pick out what color bath bubbles you want. Purple! Jaden cried out, running after her. I watched him go, longing to be the one to help pick out bath bubbles. Someday. What did I tell you, Kaelen? Coach asked. Huh? I drew my gaze away from where the sliding door going into the house had just been pulled shut. Didn't I tell you Jaden is the best little guy in the world? Yeah, you did. I said, trying to force emotions back. He's incredible. Sit down, you two, Coach said in a commanding tone that meant business. He wasn't either of our fathers, yet he treated us as if he was. We followed him up the stairs of the deck and sat at the patio table. I fidgeted nervously and glanced at Abigail. Her eyes were firmly on this man who she so obviously respected. I took a deep breath and met his gaze. I'm going to take a wild stab-in-the-dark guess that you two were never married. Am I right? That is correct, sir. My nerves made my voice crack. I'm not proud of what I did. What we did, Abigail said, reaching for my hand. It was not consensual, I mumbled, not sure if Coach would hear. As far as I'm concerned, everything leading up to that moment was consensual, Abigail said. We made some poor choices. I looked up at Coach, and I blame myself 100% for our mistake. You listen to me, young man. Coach leaned forward and pointed his finger in the direction of his house. That little boy is not a mistake. So don't let me hear you say that again. And don't you dare say that in front of him. Jaden is a gift from God, and however he came into this world is irrelevant. Now, what I want to know is why did it take you 5 years to reunite if you so obviously love each other? That's written all over both of your faces. I was incarcerated, sir. I gulped and looked down at our adjoined hands, not able to look this man in the eye. Well, that's not what I expected you to say. Coach sat back in his chair and reached his hands behind his head. Why? Because I was inebriated when Abigail stopped me. We were both inebriated, and she was underage by a few weeks, she said through clenched teeth. That's not the way the prosecutors viewed the situation. None of those witnesses or the prosecutors were in that room with us. They don't know what happened, and the only reason you went to jail was because you confessed. What did you want me to do, lie? I was trying not to raise my voice or cry. We were both drunk. I gave you the alcohol. You were underage, and I forced myself on you. You did not force yourself on me. Stop saying that. She pushed my shoulder hard. I never told you no. When did you get out of jail, son? Coach asked. Yesterday, I mumbled. How did you get here so quickly? I drove through the night. Why? He asked. Because I need to be where Abigail is. She's my best friend, the love of my life. She's the only person I've ever met who is smarter than me. Smarter? Yes, sir, I said. You a genius or something? Yes, sir, I said, although I sure wasn't smart enough to say no to alcohol 5 years ago. Have you had a drink since then? No, sir. Do you intend to start drinking again? Coach asked. I will never touch alcohol again for the rest of my life. I lifted my chin and met his gaze. Is that a promise? Yes, sir, that's a promise, I said.
Promise Abigail, not me.
Coach nudged his head in her direction. I turned to the girl I love. Abby, I promise you I will never drink alcohol again for the rest of my life. I make that same promise, she answered with confidence. Kaelen, I promise you I will never drink alcohol for the rest of my life. Coach clapped his hands together once. When he spoke again, his voice was more cheerful. Now that we've got that taken care of, Kaelen, what do you know about me? You've been an incredible father figure to my son at a time when I was not able to be here, and for that I am eternally grateful. Thank you, but that's not what I meant. Coach leaned closer and looked me in the eye. Do you know what I do for a living? No, sir. I'm the head football coach for Ball State University. I sat back in my chair, dumbfounded. A few moments ago, I threw a 65-yard Hail Mary pass that accurately landed in the hands of the head coach of Ball State University. I want you as a walk-on, Coach said. We don't start practicing for another couple of weeks, but we can get you into one of the athletic dorms right away, and you can meet some of your teammates, and I'll work with you individually to get you up to speed. Are you serious? Do I look serious? Yes, sir, I said. Where are you staying tonight, son? I was just going to get a hotel room, I said. You can stay here, he said, if you survive the likely confrontation with Abigail's father. That's not going to be a fun conversation. I shook my head in resignation. Good luck. Coach stood but pointed at both of us. You two stay here and talk for a few minutes while I help Haley with Jaden. And you plan on getting back here nice and early this evening because I'm not a night owl and we have a busy day tomorrow. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As soon as the sliding glass door closed, Abigail turned to me. Now do you understand why I told you to give it all you've got? Are you okay with this? I hesitated. This is a big decision. I don't want to make big decisions without your input. I want you near me and Jaden, she said. This will give you a chance to get to know your son, and you and me a chance to get to know each other again as adults. Our childish dreams of a future together were just that, childish dreams. We need to know if we are still each other's dreams. She moved her hand to brush a hair out of her face. You're still wearing your friendship bracelet? I reached for her hand. After all this time. And you're not? They cut it off me the night I was arrested. I cried. Physically cried. You still have it? She asked. Of course. Then we're still best friends. She raised her eyebrows. Forever, I said. She leaned forward and kissed me lightly, then with a little more passion, and finally climbed into my lap and let herself get lost in our kiss. Yeah, happiest day of my life. If only I didn't have to face her father. Chapter 24. One Tough Conversation. Abigail. What the hell are you doing in my house? Daddy, calm down and lower your voice. I held the front door open for Kaelen, who was holding a sleeping Jaden. Let us get Jaden to his bed, and then we'll come talk to you. I turned to Kaelen and nodded for him to follow me. I was glad he was carrying Jaden. I wouldn't have been able to carry him and would have had to wake him up. The stairs weren't that steep, but Jaden's not light. Second door on the right. I stepped ahead to open the door. Your dad doesn't have a shotgun, does he? Kaelen asked. I don't think so. Here, lay him down. I pulled the sheets and comforter back to make a spot. Kaelen crouched almost to the floor to gently place our son on his bed. He pulled the comforter over Jaden and knelt on the floor beside the bed. Abigail, he's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm sorry I kept you apart, I whispered, kneeling beside him. There was nothing either of us could do about that, he said, wrapping his arm around my waist. I don't ever want to be away from you again, okay? I understand if you don't want us to be together as a couple or whatever, but I want to be close by, okay? I think we'll be together eventually, I said. We just need some time. I don't want to scare you, he said, but you need to know where my head's at. I still want to marry you. You don't even know me, Kaelen. I leaned my shoulder against his. I'm not the same girl I was, and you're not the same man you were. I want to get to know you, he said. I can wait, forever if I have to. Okay. My voice was barely a squeak. Can I get your phone number? I have a feeling your dad's going to kick me out of the house about 30 seconds after we go down those stairs. I handed him my phone, and he gave me his. We typed each other's contact information in and handed our phones back. When can I see you again? He whispered, such vulnerability in his voice. Let me get through finals, okay? Maybe we could spend the day together on Saturday. Okay. You're going to be busy with Coach and getting moved into your dorm. Just focus on that. Okay. He sounded as if he was going to start crying. We'll get through this, Kaelen, I said. Just give me some time to work through some things. I won't pressure you, he said. I'm yours forever, even if you don't want me as anything more than a friend. Trust me, I said vehemently. I want you as more than a friend. I need to tell you something. He sounded nervous. I'm not pressuring you to marry me, but I don't want to do anything physical with you unless we're married. I like that plan. Not that I won't want to, he said. I won't tempt you, I said. I won't tempt you either. I'm glad we got that conversation out of the way, I said. Now we've got to have one more tough conversation. We have to talk to your parents, he guessed. Yep, I patted him on his back. Good luck. Thanks, we'll need it. Chapter 25. Meet the Parents. Kaelen. Trevor and Karen Johnson sat in the formal living room waiting when we came down the stairs. Abigail grabbed my hand and laced our fingers together in solidarity. She took the initiative and spoke first. "Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet Kaelen Andrews, Jaden's father." "He is not welcome in our home." Her dad's statement was practically a growl. Although he spoke to Abigail, his piercing glare never left my face. I didn't try to shake his hand or pretend this was a friendly visit, but I didn't back away or cower either. With my head held high, but with an apologetic expression, or what I hoped was apologetic, I sat on the sofa across from them, and Abigail sat beside me. "How did you find us?" Mr. Johnson asked. "Sir, there is nothing I can say right now that will make this situation any easier." I cleared my throat and pushed ahead, pulling courage from somewhere deep inside. "I owe you an apology." "Yes, you do," Mr. Johnson interrupted. "But it's not enough," I continued. "Nothing I ever say or do will ever be enough to make up for what I did." Mr. Johnson pursed his lips. He couldn't argue with that reasoning. "I suppose we should back up a few years and let you know that I was in love with your daughter long before that night, and we hid our relationship from you and my parents and our coaches and every adult we could possibly hide from. We barely saw each other outside of school, and I planned to wait until she was old enough to start dating. We were not sleeping together." "Nor should you have been." Mr. Johnson crossed his arms and glared at me. "I realize that," I said, "but I made a series of very poor decisions earlier that evening by drinking alcohol and encouraging Abby to drink alcohol. She and I would not have put ourselves in that situation if we hadn't been inebriated. I have made a vow to never drink alcohol again. You have my word." "Your word means nothing to me," Mr. Johnson said. "There was no excuse for what you did. No excuse." "I agree. That's why I confessed and tried to plead guilty. My attorney encouraged me to plead guilty to a lesser charge in an attempt to keep from going to prison for the rest of my life." "Prison's where you belong." "In prison, I wouldn't be able to provide financially for our son, nor be the father he deserves." "He has plenty of positive male role models in his life. He doesn't need you." "You may be right," I said, "but he deserves to know his father, and he deserves to know his father loves him and loves his mother." Abigail squeezed my hand lightly. "Abby and I have also agreed that we will not jump into a relationship again. We need to get to know each other after being apart for 5 years. And we've also committed to avoid a physical relationship prior to marriage." "She is not marrying you." Mr. Johnson stood and towered over me. "Trevor, sit down," Mrs. Johnson said, reaching for his hand. "I will let Abigail make that choice," I said. "But we agree that just because we have a child together doesn't mean we should be sleeping together. We may have messed things up the first time, but we're taking things slow for now. If we someday get married, it will be because she and I love each other, not because we feel a sense of obligation to Jaden." "Humph," Mr. Johnson continued, scowling. "I promised Coach Reese I'd get back to his house as early as I could, so I'm going to take off. I hope in the future we'll be able to find some common ground, because I intend to be part of your daughter's life and your grandson's life." I stood. Abigail rose from the sofa. "I'll walk you out." "For what it's worth," I paused and turned back to the Johnsons, "I'm glad to finally meet you in person. You have an amazing daughter." They didn't say another word as Abigail and I walked to my car. "That actually went better than I thought it would," Abigail admitted. "You held firm. I'm proud of you." "Thanks." I pulled her into my arms and held her, leaning against the side of my car. I can't even describe with words how good it feels to hold you in my arms after all this time. I wasn't sure I'd ever have the chance again. "You don't have to describe this with words because I feel exactly what you mean," she said. We held each other for a moment more. Then I pulled away and looked down into her incredible blue eyes. I wanted to tell her I loved her, but I didn't want to put pressure on her to say it back. I unwrapped myself from her and opened the door to my car. "See you in a couple of days." She continued to stand beside my car as I buckled myself in and started the engine. Before I could pull away, she tapped on my window and I pushed the button to lower the window. "I love you," she said. "Love you too." "I'm so glad you're here," she said. "I've missed you." "I've missed you too." I looked up at her. "Come here, give me one more kiss before I go." She leaned over and pressed her lips to mine in a kiss a little more passionate than she probably should have with her parents on the other side of the living room window. Then she stepped away from the car and offered me a little wave. I shifted my car into gear and pulled from her driveway. Chapter 26. The law doesn't work that way. Abigail. Grandma, I met my daddy yesterday. Jaden took another bite of his Cheerios. That didn't take long. He spoke with his mouth full of food. We played football together with Coach. My father grumbled something unintelligible, and my mom gave him a warning look. I had a talk with my parents the night before after Kaelen left, reminding them that it was important not to badmouth Jaden's father, or it would create an irreparable wedge in our family. I made it clear that if forced to make a choice, I would choose Kaelen. My father was furious, but agreed to try to be nice in front of Jaden. What did you think of your daddy, Jaden? My mom asked. He was just like I remembered him. Jaden's voice held the awe of an excited 4-year-old. Jaden, yesterday was the first time you ever met him, I said. What do you mean you remember him? You've shown his picture to me lots of times, Mommy. You have? My mom and dad said at the same time. I shrugged. I wanted him to know he had a daddy and that his daddy loved him. I always hoped they'd have a chance to meet each other. Isn't he violating probation just by trying to find you? I don't know, I mumbled. He deserves to see his son. I'm pretty sure that's incorrect, my dad said. Because of what happened, he rescinded his parental rights. That's ridiculous. I did some research last night, and I'm pretty sure he has no rights, and that he's violated probation by crossing state lines. He's also in violation by seeking you out. He's not allowed to come find you. I'm an adult now, and I say he is allowed to see me. The law doesn't work that way, Dad said. Is my daddy in trouble? Jaden reached his arms out for me to pick him up. No, buddy, he's not in trouble. I glared at my father as I picked up my son. Let's go get ready for preschool. Okay. Jaden squirmed to get down, and I gladly set him on the floor. He ran up the stairs, and I thought about all that my father had said, wondering if there was any truth to his allegations. My feet dragged as I climbed the stairs, pondering. I just promised my son that his daddy wasn't in trouble. I hoped I was right. When I entered Jaden's room, he had already removed his jammies and was standing in his little Spider-Man underwear, digging through the drawer where his shirts were kept. What shirt are you looking for, honey? The one with the football on the front. I want to show it to my daddy since he loves football almost as much as I do. I think it's hanging in the closet. I pushed hangers aside to find the black t-shirt with the football, not having the heart to tell him he wouldn't be seeing his daddy today. Here you go, buddy. Jaden pulled the shirt over his head and then sat down on the floor to pull on a pair of rugged jeans with patches at the knees, designed for preschool boys who never stopped playing and crawling and kicking balls and tackling each other. I love you, Jaden. My out-of-the-blue statement contained a sort of wonder. I love you too, Mommy. He didn't seem affected. Love for me was just part of him. He was part Kaelen, too, and I hoped they would have the chance to get to know each other. Chapter 27. 165 IQ. Kaelen. I need to drop my briefcase off at my office, and then I'll take you on a tour of the athletic facility, Coach Reese said as we pulled into a parking space at the Schumann football stadium. My stomach fluttered with the excitement about this turn of events. 2 days ago, I left prison, having not seen Abigail in 5 years and never met my son, and had few plans for my future. Today, I was being personally escorted by the head football coach at a major university, about to enroll in classes and don a uniform again. The feeling was surreal. The plush office where Coach stopped was part of a collection of offices in the athletics department. He introduced me to a few people, including his secretary and the basketball coach, who joked that if things didn't work out with the football team, to let him know and he'd find me a place on the basketball team. For the past 5 years, I'd had little else to do besides take online classes and work out. I had the physique of a linebacker, the agility of a wide receiver, and the arm of a quarterback. I was also 6'5" and perfect for rebounding on the court. The scholarship I'd been offered at Ferris State prior to leaving high school had been for basketball. I wondered what these guys would say about my pitching arm. We headed down a hallway to a large top-of-the-line workout room reserved for athletes. That meant I was no longer the largest and tallest in the room. The smell of guys sweating through powerful deodorant, rubber mats intended to protect the flooring from free weights, and steam from the attached shower room engulfed my senses. This felt like home. Coach headed straight for a group of guys from his football team, and they all stopped what they were doing to respectfully acknowledge their coach and evaluate me as potential competition. Guys, I'd like to introduce you to Kaelen Andrews. He's going to be a walk-on for the fall season. What's up? One guy stepped forward and I shook his hand. I'm Tex. I imagined he'd been recruited from a high school in Texas and wondered what his real name was, but I didn't ask. Another guy was named Eric, one named Ford, and another was James. They were relatively friendly, if not leery, of a new addition to their team. Who's sticking around this summer? Coach asked. Any of you enrolled in summer classes? I am, Tex said. Why? You looking for a roommate for Cale here? You've already given me a nickname? I chuckled. I feel so accepted. Well, if we're going to be roomies, you're going to need a nickname. So do you have room? Coach asked. Heck yeah. There ain't going to be no one here this summer. I'll be glad for the company. That's cool, I said. Thanks, man. Anytime. He reached forward and we clasped hands in a guy hug, cementing solidarity. How old are you anyway? Where are you transferring from? I'm 23, and I haven't played in a couple of years. I was stuck attending classes at a community college for a few years up in Michigan. Great, one of the guys mumbled. Just like an inexperienced freshman. Somebody's got to be your tackling dummy on the line, I said. Would you rather hit against a puny freshman during practice, or fight against a real man and be prepared for Bowling Green's defense? Ooh, slam, the guy named James said. He's got you there. Eric pushed Ford's shoulder. You're cool, man, the guy said. I couldn't remember his name. Anyway, Coach butted back in, we're heading over to the admissions and seeing if we can get this kid some scholarships. Good luck with that, James said, shaking his head. Transfer student from a community college? I lifted my chin in the air. Won't be difficult once they test my intelligence. I'll probably get a full academic scholarship. Whatever, James rolled his eyes. How about we start with that, Coach? I turned to him. Help me apply for academics, and then we'll look into athletics. Sounds good to me, Coach said with a chuckle. Pretty sure none of the other guys on my team have a 165 IQ and photographic memory. How'd you know that? I grinned at Coach. I conducted a little bit of research after you left last night. I'm aware there's more to a kid than an arm. I couldn't help thinking of how Jaden had grasped my biceps. I wondered how the players would react when they learned I was a father. We'd save that tidbit of information for another day. Tex, I'll be in touch in a couple of days when we get his transfer taken care of, Coach said. Sounds good. They all clasped our hands again and we said goodbye. Coach led me to the center of campus to the admissions office to get my paperwork started. Most of what needed to be done involved the wave of Coach's magic wand. It paid to have a head coach helping with the transition. Everyone treated him like a celebrity, and thus treated me like a celebrity. We made a lot of arrangements, including enrolling for a couple of summer classes, receiving keys and instructions for my housing assignment, and setting up an appointment for me to come back tomorrow for academic assessments. This was getting real. Before leaving the building, we passed by the student bookstore, which displayed sweatshirts and t-shirts and other clothing accessories. Hey, Coach, can we stop a minute? I want to get Jaden a hoodie with Ball State's logo. He'd probably love that, Coach said. Picking out a perfect little sweatshirt didn't take long, and soon we were walking back across campus to the athletics department. Not a bad first day at my new home. Chapter 28. Walmart. Abigail. I opened the door to the Reese's home without knocking, tired from a long day of final exams and studying. I was ready to pick up Jaden, drive home, and kick back in a hot bath. Jaden came running down the hall, wearing an adorable little zip-up hoodie with Ball State written across the front. Mommy, guess who's here? That's right. Kaelen was staying here until he got his own place. He came around the corner and rested his shoulder against the wall of the foyer, folding his arms across his chest with a soft smirk. Hey, babe, how are your exams? Good. Why did his voice give me goosebumps? Only one left, tomorrow afternoon. I start classes in 2 weeks, Kaelen said, his chest puffed slightly. You got enrolled in classes already? I crouched down to see Jaden's new sweatshirt. Did your daddy get this for you? Yes, he's going to be a football player. Jaden lifted his little fist in the air with excitement, then ran back toward Kaelen and practically jumped into his arms. Jaden sat on Kaelen's hip, clinging on like a monkey. If I didn't know better, I'd swear they'd been holding each other all his life. What are you doing this evening? Kaelen asked. Want to go to Walmart with me and pick out some things for my dorm room? Can we, Mommy? Jaden clung tighter with his arms around Kaelen's neck. Please? What kind of things do you need to get? I sighed. So much for a hot bath. Sheets, towels, toiletries, snacks, stuff. Okay, we'll have to take my car, though, because Jaden still has to use his booster seat. That's cool. I don't know my way around this town yet anyway. Where's Haley? I asked. I'm right here, she answered from the living room just a few feet away from where we were talking, feet propped up and reading a novel. I think I've been replaced as the after-school babysitter. Don't worry, the guys are going to get busy again with football and classes. Enjoy the reprieve. I'm not complaining. She held up the book she was reading. Careful, you're going to turn into a bookworm like me. Can't think of anyone better to emulate, she said. You flatter me. Don't worry, your job is secure as long as I'm in college. Of course, eventually you'll be heading off to college. Heck no, I'm staying home and going to Ball State. I'm going to save bank on student loans living at home. I can relate to that. Hey, we're taking off to Walmart. Have fun. Haley barely took her nose out of her book the whole time we were talking. Kaelen carried Jaden to my car and helped him get strapped in. I could get used to having him around. I drove to Walmart and wove through the parking lot, trying to find a safe space to park. Again, Kaelen took the initiative to help Jaden out of his booster seat and carried him into the store. Jaden stayed in his daddy's arms most of the time we were shopping, and Kaelen let him pick out colors and styles for almost everything he bought. After picking out the necessities, Kaelen headed for the sporting equipment and picked out a soccer ball, basketball, football, baseball, bat, and a nice mitt. Do you have your own baseball mitt already, buddy? Or should we buy one to keep at Daddy's house? I think we're going to need another one, just in case. Jaden's voice was so serious, and Kaelen helped him pick out a small glove just the right size for a T-ball star. With a full cart, we headed back toward the front of the store. Kaelen stopped short and backed up. Hang on. He took off down a side aisle, and I cranked the grocery cart in a U-turn. I found the guys down the baby aisle looking at a lineup of car seats and booster seats. Do you think that's big enough? Kaelen asked about the one Jaden was pointing to. Is that the same kind you've got in Mom's car? This one's the best color, Jaden said. Oh, yes, color is important. Kaelen winked at me and my heart melted. He was buying a booster seat so his son could ride in his car. There are fewer things more adorable in the world than a man who loves his son. I wasn't sure how much longer I wanted to pretend we weren't a couple. This could be our life, 3 of us. Suddenly that was all I could think about. When we got to the car, Jaden wanted to try out his new booster seat, but Kaelen promised they'd put the seat in his Mustang as soon as they got back to Coach's house. Jaden helped Kaelen move all their treasures from my trunk to his and helped position his new booster seat just right in the back seat of the car. Come on, Mommy, let's go for a ride, Jaden said. Hop in, let's go get a burger at McDonald's. Kaelen held open the passenger door to his Mustang, and with only minimal reluctance, I climbed in. The smell transported me back in time. Even after all these years, his cologne clung to the fabric of the upholstery. Jaden jabbered in the back seat about all kinds of things from his day, but I couldn't concentrate on most of it because I was distracted by this man at my side who still gave me goosebumps and kept glancing over at me. Once again, Kaelen carried Jaden into the building, and they picked out meals together from the menu above the counter. I waited for Jaden to tell his daddy all the different items he'd tried and what he liked and disliked about each one. Kaelen's patience seemed to have no end, and he was completely enthralled getting to know his son. I found myself falling more and more in love with him with every passing minute. We sat together as a little family, eating our burgers and fries, then piled into the Mustang again and drove back to the Reese's house. In the driveway, Kaelen helped Jaden move from one booster seat to the other, and soon the little guy was ready to ride home with his mommy, completely oblivious to how badly his mommy and daddy wished they were riding home together. Hey, I'm moving into my dorm tomorrow. You should stop by after your last final and I'll give the grand tour. Kaelen leaned against my car and I melted into him, wrapping my arms around his torso. I'll try, okay? I squeaked, fully intending to move heaven and earth to go see his new dorm room. Without making a public scene in the Reese's driveway, we reached for each other in a mildly passionate kiss. I love you, Abigail, Kaelen said before releasing me to climb into my car. I love you too, Kaelen. He stepped away from my car, his expression pained as he watched me back out of the driveway. Chapter 29. Batman Bedsheets. Kaelen. I was just putting the finishing touches on my organizational efforts in my new dorm room when a soft knock on my door drew my attention away. My new roommate, Tex, wasn't expected back for another hour, and there were very few other people who knew my new residence. My stomach fluttered when I held the door open for the most beautiful girl in the world. Suddenly nervous. How was your last final? I cleared my throat, not sure why I was anxious and sweating. Glad I'm done. Abigail let her backpack slide from her shoulders and clunk to the floor beside my bed. I need a break. Well, you've come to the right spot. This tiny dorm room is the perfect place to kick back and take a break. She strode over to lift the pillow from my bed. Batman bedsheets. You're going to be the big man on campus with these. The guys on my team will be extremely envious and want to know the name of my interior designer. I flopped onto the bed and placed my hands behind my head, spreading my arms and crossing my legs, completely relaxed, or at least pretending to be relaxed. Abigail sat on the edge of my bed, and I could sense her reluctance to be there, warring with the desire to be in my arms. My expression stilled, all joking aside, trying not to communicate with my eyes an invitation to lie down beside me. She did it anyway, slid her shoes off her feet and lifted them onto the bed, sliding into my arms as if she belonged there, tucking her head onto my arm, her face close to mine. I wanted to kiss her so badly, but I didn't want to scare her away. I didn't want her to think I was going back on my word to keep our relationship from becoming physical too soon. Leaning forward to kiss the tip of her nose, I pulled back a few inches. Hi. Hi, she whispered back, gazing up at me with those robin's egg blue eyes. I like your new dorm room. Even the Batman bedsheets? Especially the Batman bedsheets. After staring into each other's eyes for a few more long, delicious seconds, we'd both had all we could handle. Her lips pressed to mine and I reached hungrily for her, escaping into her kiss. The kiss didn't last long before I pulled away and gazed down at her lying in my arms. This is going to be so much harder than I ever imagined, I said, before pressing my lips to hers again. We kissed for several long, incredible minutes, my hands twitching to move from her waist and hips, wanting to explore the woman in my arms. Rubbing my hands on her back caused the fabric to move aside, and suddenly my hands were touching the skin of her lower back. I moaned with frustration and forced my hands out of her shirt before the darn thing wound up on the floor beside my bed. She seemed to have forgotten our commitment to avoid this very behavior, because she wove her hands into my hair and then around to my shoulders and touched my face and then my chest, and then her hands were up my shirt, and when she reached for my zipper, that woke me up. Abigail, we can't do this. I pulled away. We promised each other. I don't want to wait. She sounded close to tears. I've waited 5 years to have a second chance with you. I can't think straight. Well, I certainly can't think straight with your hands all over me. Marry me, her tone pleaded with me. I want to be in your arms every night. I don't want to marry you just so we can have sex, I said. Then make love to me now and we'll worry about getting married later. The first time I make love to you will be on our wedding night. No fair, she pouted. I want you so badly. You're not making this easy on me, Abigail. I dream about having you in my bed. I want you in my bed, but I want to do things right this time. Even as we talked about how badly we needed to be apart, our legs wove together, our arms wrapped around each other, and every inch of my body felt every inch of hers where we connected. Thank goodness we were fully dressed, or my resolve would have already disappeared. That was the moment Tex walked into our dorm room and met Abigail. She disentangled herself from me and sat up quickly, straightening her clothes from where it had gone askew. I pulled my new Disney cartoon blanket over my midsection, hiding clothing areas that shouldn't have been unzipped and untucked. Dude, you should have put a sock on the door handle or something, Tex said, covering his eyes. Or at the very least lock the door. It's okay, I was just leaving. Abigail swung her legs off my bed and slipped her feet into her shoes. Wait, Abby, stop. I grabbed her waist to hold her in place as I scooted closer. Really, Haley's going to be wondering why I'm late. You're not due home for another hour. Just hold on. I want you to meet Tex. I glanced over at my new roommate, who still had one hand on the door, his backpack resting over one shoulder. Tex, this is my girlfriend Abigail. Abby, this is Tex, the best wide receiver on the Ball State football team. Nice to meet you, Abigail. Tex stepped forward hesitantly and held out his hand. Abigail placed her tiny hand in his. You're in my intercultural communications class, actually, she said. Or were in my class, anyway. Semester's over. Sorry, I must not be as observant. I apologize that I don't remember you. There are 300 people in that lecture hall, and unless you're a 6'10" bodybuilder like you football players, tiny little geeks like me hide in plain sight. We all chuckled at the accuracy of her description, and I was glad the ice was broken. Anyway, it was nice to be introduced, but I really must go. Abigail turned and kissed me quickly, then stood and hurried over to where she'd dropped her backpack. Hey, babe, am I picking you up on Saturday morning? I called after her. Maybe we should meet at Coach's house. Abigail bit her lower lip. My dad is still really ticked off. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a restraining order or something. Seriously? It's been days. My brow creased and my stomach clenched. Abigail turned and strode back into the room, leaning close to my ear so only I could hear. No, Kaelen. It's been 5 years of anger building up inside him, and you showing up lit a fire. Why is it that you and I create so much heat together? I took advantage of her face so close to mine and kissed her neck. She pulled away and smirked, holding up her wrist and flicking her hand as we used to do when we wanted to say hello from across a room or a football field. Her red and yellow friendship bracelet flashed, and I sighed that same way I'd done every time she'd done that when we were teens. You need to make me a new one of those, I said in a husky voice. Maybe, she said, heading for the door again. See you Saturday. Give Jaden a hug for me, I called after her. I always do, she said over her shoulder, but she was already in the hallway. I fell back onto my bed and covered my face with my Batman pillow, growling in frustration. What was that? Tex asked. More importantly, who was that? And how long have you had a girlfriend? You've been in Muncie 4 whole days. I met Abigail when she was a freshman in high school, actually. I rolled over and propped myself up on one elbow, still half covered in blankets and holding my pillow. What's up with the cartoons and Disney princesses? Did you shop in the kids section of the department store or something? I had a 4-year-old little boy helping me pick out my bedding. I see that, Tex raised his eyebrows. I know we just met, but there's a lot of things about you that are very confusing. Abigail is the love of my life. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. And the mother of my son, Jaden. Whoa, okay. Tex pursed his lips and raised his eyebrows. Why aren't you getting a place together? We are just getting reunited after being apart for 5 years. 5 years apart and a 4-year-old son? Yeah, I said. I didn't find out she was pregnant until 9 months later when she sent me a Father's Day card. Dude, that's harsh. She had already skipped town and moved in with her grandmother, and I had no idea where she was. The only clue I had was that the postmark was from Muncie, Indiana. Double harsh. It gets worse. I hesitated and Tex waited. I was incarcerated at the time I received the card, and we were both violating court orders to be communicating at all. Do I even want to know? Remember how I said I met her when she was a freshman in high school? You didn't, Tex said. I did. You cockroach. Yeah, that's what the prosecutor said too. What were you thinking? I mean, she's hot, but how old were you? 18. And there's more. You might as well know now in case you want to kick me out and demand I go find another roommate. Lay it on me, Tex said. We were both extremely inebriated, and she may or may not have consented, depending on how you interpret the situation. She claimed you raped her? No, but that's what I pled guilty to in my confession, I said. You confessed to a crime you didn't do? Tex raised his eyebrows again. I didn't answer his question, but my silence was an answer in itself. So you did. My attorney encouraged me to rescind my confession and offer a plea of guilty to a lesser charge. The judge wasn't happy about any of it and threw everything else at me he could. Drunk and disorderly, criminal sexual conduct 3rd degree, giving alcohol to a minor, you name it, he tried it. We fought as best we could, but several of her friends came forward as witnesses, plus my original confession. It wasn't pretty. That's intense, man. Tex was quiet for a minute. When did you get out? 5 days ago. Came straight here, huh? Drove through the night, I said. And your son? I love him more than life itself. Well, this is going to be an interesting year, Tex said. I hope to marry her sometime soon, if her dad doesn't have me arrested again. What for? I'm sure the minute I crossed state lines I violated probation, I said, and seeking her out in the first place was a definite violation. While you're waiting to get arrested, you want to go throw the ball around? That would be great. I swung my legs off my bed and reached to tuck my shirt back in. Tex turned around and groaned. Could you please just lock the door next time? We're not sleeping together until we get married, I said. Yeah, right. Sell it to someone else. We're not, I insisted. Hey, can we go to the weight room when we're done at the field and maybe go run a 5K? Tex laughed. Yeah, man. Anything that will get you through this, tough time. Chapter 30. The Best Football Player Ever. Abigail. Daddy! Jaden ran onto the football field to the 30-yard line where Kaelen was practicing with his team and jumped into Kaelen's arms. His shoulder pads didn't seem to impede his ability to snuggle with his son, and he turned to show Jaden off to his teammates. They all moved forward to give Jaden high fives. I walked a little slower, knowing this was entering new territory. Jaden loved coming to see Coach at his football field and had a good rapport with the trainers and assistant coaches, but this was the first time coming since Kaelen had been home. Wow, it felt good to even think that. Kaelen wasn't just here to visit. He was home, with us. In a lot of ways, this seemed normal and comfortable, as if we'd never been apart. Kaelen stood among his teammates, introducing them to his son. Some of the guys had known Jaden for a long time and just thought of him as Coach's grandson, but this was the first time everyone was connecting the dots between their mysterious new teammate and the little boy who captured the hearts of every adult he met. When I approached the group of guys, Kaelen turned and leaned down for a quick kiss. That also felt incredible and normal. Guys, have you all met Jaden's mom? This is my girlfriend, Abigail. Jaden mostly comes with Coach when I'm in class, I said, but I've seen them around. Many of the guys stepped forward to shake my hand and welcome me to the football family, telling me how much they loved my little guy. They all had these weird looks on their faces, and some of them patted Kaelen on the back or shoulder. Yes, I should explain things, Kaelen said, loud enough to reach the ears of his teammates. We've been apart for a few years, but we're getting reacquainted. Long story that I'm not getting into. We're moving forward now. Kaelen had told me that he confessed the whole story to his roommate, but didn't want the rest of the team to know his personal business. 3 weeks had passed since he showed up in the library, and my life had never felt more right. We tried not to spend time alone because we didn't want to tempt ourselves or each other again. I felt bad for the way I'd behaved in Kaelen's dorm room a few weeks prior and promised him and myself not to do that again. This couldn't last much longer, though. Jaden was confused why his daddy couldn't move in with him and his mommy. I was tired of kissing goodbye instead of kissing goodnight. Kaelen had football and classes as a distraction, and I was taking one summer class, but we needed to be together as a family. We waited to make sure this wasn't just attraction or that we weren't getting married as an obligation to Jaden. We'd fallen right back into the same habit of intellectual discussions. We helped each other with studying and discussed future plans. We spent just enough time alone together to know we loved each other beyond just a bond with our son. I was determined that the next time we had a chance for a heart-to-heart, I'd broach the subject. We either needed to get married or move in together. Daddy, will you throw the ball? Jaden asked. You want to play catch with me, buddy? Kaelen set him on the ground and someone handed Jaden a regulation-sized football that dwarfed his little hands. Jaden reached up and handed the ball to Kaelen. No, I want you to throw the ball as far as you can. You're the quarterback. I'm the lineman. Oh, you are, huh? Kaelen chuckled. You've been listening to your mom too much. I always listen to Mommy, Jaden said. Me too, Kaelen said. Give me 5, buddy. I can catch from really far away. Tex stepped forward. You want me to run to the other side of the field and catch the ball from your daddy? Yes, please. They all chuckled at Jaden's adorable, polite manner. Run a post pattern, Kaelen said. I'll get it to you. Tex took off down the field, and the other guys backed away to give Kaelen room to set it up. At just the right time, Kaelen let the ball loose, and it soared in a perfect spiral down to about the 5-yard line, where Tex caught the pass cleanly and ran into the end zone. Jaden jumped up and down, cheering for the perfect play. The season was still a few months away, but as far as Jaden was concerned, this was his daddy playing football with his team. An older man in a polo shirt approached Kaelen. "Coach said you were good, but dang, you're going to knock me out of my starting position," one of his teammates said. "Nah, you've been here longer." Kaelen scooped Jaden into his arms. "Was that far enough for you, buddy?" "That was super far," Jaden said, putting his hands on both sides of Kalen's face. "You're the best football player ever." "I don't know about that, but I'll think of you every time I throw the ball, okay?" "Okay," Jaden nodded. I stepped forward. "All right, little man, we've got to let Daddy get back to practicing." "Will you come visit me tonight?" Jaden asked Kaelen. "I'm going to take your mommy out to dinner tonight, and you're going to stay home with Grandma and Grandpa, okay?" "When will you come visit me again?" Jaden's disappointment reminded me how badly we needed to be together. "I'll pick you and Mommy up Saturday morning, and we'll spend the whole day together." Kaelen glanced at me, and I nodded in agreement. "You want to go to the beach at the lake? Maybe bring a picnic?" "Yes!" Jaden wrapped his arms around Kalen's neck, and I closed the distance to hug both of them and kissed Kaelen with a little more than a peck, but not inappropriate in mixed company. "Love you," Kaelen said as we gazed into each other's eyes for a few seconds. "I love you too," I said. "Have fun at practice." "See you in a few hours." I peeled Jalen from Kalen's arms and set him on the ground. "Bye, Daddy," Jaden called over his shoulder. "Bye, buddy." Jaden took my hand, and I felt both of our physical pains as we walked away. Chapter 31. Cold Showers. Kaelen. I turned back to the guys with a half grimace. "I don't know how you do it, man." Tex stepped up beside me and put his arm around my shoulder. "Cold showers," I said. "Lots of cold showers." "What?" James asked. "You ain't knocking that?" "Not until we're married," I said. Anyone within earshot groaned in solidarity. "She's got you whipped," Eric said. "You've already got a kid together. What's the problem?" Ford asked. "It was a mutual decision," I said. "We just got back together after several years apart. You don't just jump back into the sack together." "I would," James grumbled. "It's complicated," I said. Tex broke in. "How about if we get back to practice and quit discussing Kale's sex life, or lack thereof?" "Thank you, Tex." The coaches split us up to do some planning, and I forced myself to focus on the practice and set aside my inappropriate thoughts about Abigail. Chapter 32. Romantic Proposal. Abigail. "We need to get an apartment together or something," I blurted out as soon as the waitress left with our food orders. "This is getting ridiculous. You and Jaden want to be together. You and I want to be together. We need to be a family." "I agree," Kaelen said. "You do?" I thought he'd fight me on this. "Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to think with my hormones, but you're right. It's ridiculous." Kaelen reached across the table and took my hand in his. "What are you thinking? Do you have any apartments you'd suggest?" "Married housing on campus?" I shrugged. "They're furnished, and we're both students." "We're not married," he raised his eyebrows. "So let's get married." "Just like that?" "Do you want to be with anyone else besides me for the rest of your life?" I asked. "Heck no. I don't want to be with anyone else for the rest of eternity." "Okay then. Let's plan a date a few weeks from now, get the families together, and do this." "Not exactly the romantic proposal I intended," Kaelen chuckled. "Would you like me to get down on one knee right here in the restaurant?" I asked. "Oh, you silly girl. I'm the one who's supposed to get down on one knee," he said, "with a fancy diamond ring in a box, baring my soul to you and begging you to spend the rest of your life with me." "I don't need a fancy ring, Kaelen. I just want to sleep beside you every single night. I want Jaden to wake us up on Saturday mornings by jumping into our bed and snuggling with us, begging me to make pancakes. And I desperately want to have sex with you, like immediately." The waitress stepped into view with a tray of salads and breadsticks, her jaw dropped and eyes wide. "Not right this minute," I said to the shocked waitress. "That's, good." She set our salads in front of us and chuckled nervously. "Thought I was going to have to come back later. I realize these booths seem private, but not that private." I promise we can wait until after dessert, Kaelen joked. But I'm not sure we'll make it out of the parking lot. We all laughed at his joke, but I knew we weren't far away from taking that next step, and it couldn't come soon enough. Chapter 33. We're ready. Kaelen. Tex is going home for the weekend for his cousin's wedding. Why was I nervous? She just told me that she was ready to move in together. A couple of nights in my dorm room would be a good trial run. My parents would freak if I stayed out all night, Abigail said. Can't Jaden stay with Haley? They would know exactly what I was doing. Is that such a bad thing? I reached for her hand. You just said we should get the families together and make it official. You're going to figure it out pretty quickly. What about just Saturday afternoon and evening? She suggested. We could spend half the day with Jaden and then have Haley watch him the rest of the day. Claim we're going on a date. She doesn't need to know where we're going. I'm seeing your vision, I nodded. Let's do it. Is it weird that we're discussing marriage and sex as if we're planning an afternoon picnic? Abigail asked. If we'd planned something the first time, we never would have gotten ourselves into this mess, I said. Our collective intelligence should have been enough to keep us from drinking alcohol. I think we're both going to enjoy this more sober anyway, she joked. That made my stomach clench and I lowered my voice. I promise not to hurt you again, Abigail. I trust you, Kaelen, she said, and I think we're ready. I've been ready for a long time, I grumbled. Me too, she admitted. But now we are ready. As a couple. Yeah, I agreed. We're ready. Chapter 34. 2 Nervous Teenagers. Abigail. Although we had fun playing with our son at the beach, Kaelen and I couldn't keep our eyes off each other. There was a fire that burned between us that was almost palpable. We got Jaden settled at Haley's, stuffed full of picnic food and exhausted from the sun and wind and swimming. He'd be asleep before we left the driveway. That made it easier to justify handing him off to his babysitter so we could be alone for a few hours. The residence hall was nearly a ghost town on a Saturday afternoon in the middle of the summer semester. We practically had the building to ourselves, and we definitely had the dorm room to ourselves. Kaelen locked the door and we stood there, nervous. This was a huge step for any couple, but particularly for us because of our disaster of a first experience. I was told in counseling that my first time as an adult could be traumatic and emotionally difficult. I kind of feel like I'm covered in lake water, Kaelen said. I was thinking about maybe taking a shower. He hitched his thumb in the direction of the bathroom. Want some company? I asked. His grin was a combination of excitement and confusion. Really? Yeah, why not? I shrugged. I'm going to need a shower too. I didn't even want to suggest it because I didn't think you'd say yes. This is going to be difficult for you, isn't it? Well, yeah, I've had to deal with a lot of guilt over what I did, he said. What we did, I corrected him. I closed the distance between us and wrapped my arms around his waist. Remember, Kaelen, I didn't tell you no, and we had talked about taking that next step in our relationship. I wasn't some chick you picked up at a party and got drunk with the intention of taking advantage of me. I was your girlfriend. I pulled back and looked up at him, then reached up and placed my hand on the side of his face. He was avoiding meeting my gaze. Look at me, Kaelen. He finally did, and there was a panic in his expression. Hey, we don't have to do this, I said. I'm not going to pressure you into doing anything you're not ready for. I want to be ready, he said, finally giving me his full attention. I've dreamt about making love to you for years. Now that we're actually here, I'm afraid. You're not going to hurt me again, Kaelen. How do you know that for sure? For one, we're sober. Our ability to make rational decisions is clear and we're in control. 2, we're adults now. This isn't just teenage hormones. We're in love. We're getting married. We're making a forever commitment to each other. And 3, and I hope this isn't one of those TMI things, I had a baby, remember? No, actually, I wasn't there, he said, a brief moment of frustration clouding his countenance. He took a deep breath and brought his gaze back around to mine. But I understand. You'll be there for our next baby, I said. Someday. A long time from now. Why are you so good to me? He brushed the loose tendrils away from my face. We're good to each other, I said. We're good for each other. With hesitancy, Kaelen took a step back, still with me in his arms, and pulled me toward the bathroom, his gaze never leaving mine. He closed the bathroom door and finally disentangled his arms from me and leaned over to turn on the shower. I'd never seen Kaelen without his clothes on. He was beautiful in a very non-sexual way. He was elegance and purity and a perfect specimen of masculinity. I somehow knew instinctively that he also saw my beauty as more than something physical. We took our time getting to know each other's bodies slowly, carefully, lovingly. The wild, passionate abandon was pushed aside for a more mature love. When we'd taken the time to explore with our eyes, we explored with our hands and our kisses, letting the water and steam wash away any apprehension. The shower eventually ran cooler, and we took that as a sign to turn off the water and move into the bedroom. Again, we took our time, lying together, kissing, exploring, connecting emotionally and physically, giving our whole hearts and minds and bodies to each other. If only we'd waited when we were teenagers. If only we could have a do-over and go back in time. This time, when he held me close, drawing in the scent of my wet hair, taking deep, passionate breaths, I was right there with him, holding him as he held me, clinging to him as he clung to me. We cried together for a different reason, an abandonment of fear, a completion of a hunger that had begun when two nervous teenagers kissed for the first time in a kitchen while waiting for a frozen pizza to bake. The day they'd pledged their love to each other, promising to be each other's first. We fell asleep in each other's arms. Chapter 35. Call My Attorney. Kaelen. Football practice is not the best time to have the earth crumble beneath your feet. Too many witnesses. Too many people judging your every move. Too many peers looking to you as an example, putting you on a pedestal. I had become the #1 quarterback on our team, with Tex as my right-hand receiver. We connected on and off the field, working out together every day, running miles and miles and practicing for hours. He was the person I turned to for help that day. He knew more than the rest of the guys. He knew my past. He knew Abigail and I had decided to get married. He knew immediately upon walking into our dorm room on Sunday afternoon that I hadn't been alone over the weekend. He knew what that meant for my relationship with Abigail. I knew I could trust him. "Tex!" I called across the field. He saw them walking toward me and knew immediately what their presence meant. He came running and reached me before they did. In the outside pocket of my backpack is my cell phone. The top person on my contacts list is my attorney. Call him first and call Abigail second, and go find Coach. He'll know how to help. I'm not going to let them arrest me in front of my team. I turned away from my shocked teammates and strode confidently toward the two police officers. "Hey guys, I'm coming willingly. Please don't put handcuffs on me in front of my teammates." "Are you Kaelen Andrews?" "Yes, I am." "Mr. Andrews, we have an arrest warrant for violation of the terms of your probation. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." I'd heard it all before. This time I was prepared. I walked beside them as they walked with me out of the stadium. Chapter 36. Testimonies. Kaelen. "You've got to let Abigail testify," I said to the court-ordered attorney, Joe Sawyer. Drake Leonard, my attorney from Michigan, had assured me the man would do a fine job defending me and to trust the system. "You don't know the full history, obviously, but she's the victim and they wouldn't let her testify the first time because she was a minor. She's not a minor anymore, and as the victim, she deserves to be heard." "We'll have her in the courtroom during your bail hearing," Joe said, "but I can't guarantee the judge will let her speak." "At least we can try," I said. Although I was sober and not afraid, I still didn't get much sleep in the jail that night. Knowing I'd see Abigail the following morning kept my mood positive and optimistic. We hadn't been together since Saturday evening when I dropped her off at Haley's. Jaden had taken a long nap, eaten dinner, had a bath, and gotten into his jammies. After helping Abigail get Jaden into his booster seat, we held each other beside her car for several minutes. Our worlds changed that night, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. We had connected in ways I never knew possible. Our lovemaking had been almost spiritual. I lay awake in the jail cell all night, remembering every touch and kiss. Now, preparing to enter a courtroom to plead my case to a judge who may or may not extradite me back to Michigan, who may or may not throw the book at me the same way the judge had done 5 years ago, all I felt was resignation and acceptance. This ordeal would only be a moment in time, and then we'd be together for the rest of our lives. As I stepped into the courtroom, a sweet voice greeted me from the front row of benches. "Daddy! Hi, Daddy!" I smiled at him and gave him a little wave. "Daddy, I want to come sit with you." He reached out of Abigail's arms, but she held him firm. "In a little while, buddy." I chanced talking to him even though I knew it could get me in trouble. "Stay with Mommy for a few more minutes." My attorney gave me a dirty look. I stood where I was required to stand, comforted by the vast number of people who had come to the courtroom on my behalf. In addition to Abigail and Jaden, Coach and his wife were there, Haley, Tex, and several other of my teammates. "Mr. Andrews, tell me why you are standing in my courtroom." The judge sounded annoyed that he was required to deal with me, a probation violator from Michigan. "Your Honor, I'd like to respectfully ask that Abigail Johnson speak in my place, as she was the victim and was never given a chance to tell her story in court the first time I was arrested." The judge raised his eyebrows and his jaw dropped. "Fine, bring her forward." Abigail kept our son in her arms as she approached the lectern and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. The reason Mr. Andrews is in your courtroom is because my father called the police to disclose Kaelin's location. Mr. Andrews is my fiancé and my son's father. I was 3 weeks too young at the time Jaden was conceived, and that was one of the reasons Kaelen was arrested. I have a genius-level IQ, and so does Kaelen. That's why he didn't see me as too young. We fell in love talking about science in our school's library. We hadn't intended to become physically involved while we were so young, but that's in the past. We are now both in college and striving to raise our son as best we can. Having Kaelen in jail would benefit no one. My son and I would be forced to live off state assistance, and our son would be without his father, a situation which could have generational consequences. As the victim of the original crime, I'm asking that you drop all charges and release Kaelen from any requirements to stay away from his family. In order to fulfill the remainder of his service to society, I'd suggest he be given the opportunity to work with youth, speaking out against teen drinking and the importance of abstinence. That's all I have to say at this time, Your Honor. I'm available if you have any other questions." "Can I see Daddy now?" Jaden asked. His innocence was adorable, and everyone in the courtroom chuckled. Even the judge seemed to be forcing himself not to smile. "Almost time, buddy," Abigail said. They made their way back to the bench in the front row directly behind me. I sensed rather than saw them there. "Anything you'd like to add, Mr. Andrews?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I'd like to ask that you speak to Coach Reese for a moment." The judge sighed. "My courtroom has become a circus." He waved Coach forward. "Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Derek Reese, and I'm the head coach for the Ball State University football team. I've also been helping my daughter babysit young Jaden since he was just a baby. I witnessed the reunion of this little family after years apart, and I've seen the way this little boy adores his daddy. Tearing him away from his father at this point would cause irreparable harm. I'd also like to speak on behalf of Mr. Andrews' character. I recruited him to play football at Ball State, and he graciously agreed to act as third-string backup quarterback. He has since proven to be a natural leader and a role model to the other players. I helped him get settled into his dorm and apply for classes. He tested out of the basics and started taking senior-level classes immediately. When Mr. Andrews was arrested yesterday, he came with the officers willingly to avoid them needing to handcuff him in front of his teammates. This is an upstanding young man. As Ms. Johnson mentioned, no good could possibly come from extraditing him to Michigan for probation violation for a crime he committed 5 years ago that the victim herself asked you to forgive. Put him to work doing community service, but don't lock him in jail. That's all. I'm available if you have any questions." "You've given me a great deal to consider." The judge thumbed through some paperwork and then lifted his gaze. "But ultimately this is partially out of my control. I'd like to take a few minutes to consult with the judge and prosecuting attorney in Michigan. Counselors, could you please approach the bench?" Chapter 37. More Grandparents. Kaelen. I waited, not able to hear what the judge was saying to my attorney and the prosecuting attorney. I chanced looking behind me to smile at Abigail and Jaden, and then glanced around at the other people in the courtroom. My parents were there, sitting in the back row. My mom and dad smiled at me, and my mom waved lightly. Emotions pricked my eyes, and I waved to my parents. I pointed to my son, who was sitting behind me, and they beamed. Abigail turned around and pointed to my parents, telling Jaden those were his grandparents. I couldn't wait for them to meet. Maybe we could pull together a wedding in the next few days so my parents could be here. My attention was drawn back to the woman behind me, and I offered her a soft smile. "How you holding up?" "I'll be glad when this is over," Abigail grumbled, "but at least we're together." "We should get married right away," I whispered, "while my parents are here." "I was thinking the same thing," she said. "Are you terribly mad at my father?" "How could I be? He brought you into this world." I winked at her. "You're a very forgiving man." "I love you, babe." I faced forward again as my attorney returned to my side. "Well?" "Looking positive," Joe said. "He wants to talk to the prosecutors in Michigan just to make sure there aren't any other outstanding arrest warrants or charges against you, but our prosecuting attorney is comfortable with a favorable outcome locally. Nobody wants to put a young, responsible father in jail for something he did 5 years ago and has already served time for. Hold tight for a few minutes." I turned around again to meet Abigail's gaze. "Did you catch all that?" "Yeah," she sighed. "I want to get a hotel suite tonight. I don't care how much it costs. Jaden will have his own bed and conk out early. I don't want to be apart anymore." "I agree. It's also time our last names matched." "Did I tell you that Jaden already has your last name?" She grinned. "I listed your name as his father and your last name is on his birth certificate." "I love you more and more every day, you know that?" A warmth grew inside my chest. "You guys are sickly sweet," Joe muttered. "I mean this in the very best way when I say I hope I never see you in my courtroom again." "The feeling is mutual," I grinned at the young attorney. "I'll enjoy watching you win the MAC championship this fall." "I'll get you complimentary tickets to our opening home game." "Deal," Joe said. After we sat there forever, but it was probably less than an hour, the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Samuel Whiteford." The judge and courtroom got settled, and then Judge Whiteford spoke directly to me. "Mr. Andrews?" "Yes, sir." I stood and buttoned my sport coat, nervous but cautiously optimistic. "You have a number of people who seem to think you're a pretty good guy. I'd like to see you continue to make a positive difference in this world. The state of Michigan has chosen not to force extradition in favor of you serving the remainder of your 2 years probation under my jurisdiction. I trust that I will not see you back in my courtroom." "Thank you, Your Honor," I gulped. "This court is in recess." He rapped his gavel on his desk and stood. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Samuel Whiteford," the bailiff called out. As soon as the judge had left the room, Abigail started crying, and I hurried around the barrier to hold her in my arms, Jaden between us, clinging to my neck. "It's over, babe. It's over. I'm right here." "Don't ever leave me again." She was shaking and crying, all the emotions from 5 years of worry coming out in relief that the ordeal was over. "I promise," I said. "We'll never be apart again." I leaned around our son to press my lips to hers over and over, barely contained passion concealed behind relief and thanksgiving. There would be time for passion later tonight, and every night, from now until forever. We dried our tears, and I pulled Jaden out of her arms and into mine. I held him with almost as much happiness as the day I met him, and he clung to me. "Can we be together now, Daddy?" "Yes, buddy. Every day and every night from now on." "Yay!" He laid a kiss right on my lips, and I laughed. "You want to come meet Daddy's mom and dad? They're your grandparents, just like Mommy's mother and father are your grandparents." "I have more grandparents?" There was excitement in his voice and expression. "You sure do. Let's go meet them." I took Abigail's hand and carried Jaden over to my parents. "Mom, Dad, this is Jaden." "Hello, Jaden," my mom said when we came close. "How are you?" "Are you my daddy's mommy?" He kept his arms around my neck. "I am." "Can I call you Grandma?" "You sure can," she said. Jaden leaned right out of my arms and into my mom's. He was almost too heavy for her, and my dad stepped forward to lift Jaden from behind, cradling him close with my mom. "Are you my grandpa?" Jaden asked, looking right up into his face. "Yes, I am," My dad didn't even try to hide his husky voice or the tears that poured down his cheeks. I'm so excited to meet you. My daddy's going to come home and live with me now, Jaden said. He's going to be my daddy forever. We all chuckled. Mom, Dad, I don't think you've ever officially met Abigail. I pulled her forward and wrapped my arms around her. Abigail, welcome to our family. My mom let Jaden climb fully into my dad's arms, and she reached over to pull Abigail close. I look forward to getting to know you. I can see how much my son loves you. They all shed more tears, and I noticed a few other people beside me waiting to shake my hand. Coach came forward first, and we pulled each other into a hug. Thanks, Coach, I choked out, tears flowing freely down my cheeks. I expect you on the field early tomorrow to make up for missing practice today, he joked with mock sternness. You got it. Tex stepped up and stuck out his hand. It was nice having you for a roommate. Guess we'll see each other on the field. Thanks for being such a good friend, man. We shared a guy handshake/hug. James, Eric, and Ford also stepped forward to shake my hand, razzing me about missing practice and congratulating me on a good outcome. Abigail hugged Haley and her mom while I turned back to my parents. Where are you guys staying? I asked. The Marriott downtown, my mom said. Maybe they'll have a vacancy and we'll stay there too so we can hang out and play in the pool and go to dinner. Plus, I want you to meet Abigail's parents. Are they here? My mom looked around. I doubt it, I said with a nervous chuckle. I think Mr. Johnson was hoping they'd lock me up and throw away the key. And you want us to meet this man? My dad asked. He's Abigail's father, I stated definitively. He's special if for that reason alone. He'll grow to love me as a son-in-law. So when is this wedding anyway? My mom asked. If you stick around for a couple of days, I'd love to get married with you here. We can stay as long as you need us. Well, for personal reasons, I'd really like to get married as soon as possible. They all chuckled along with me. Chapter 38. Parental Rights. Kaelen. Can I get a few minutes alone with your dad before you come into the house? I sat with Abigail in the front seat of my car, having sent Jaden home with Coach and Haley. My parents trailed along and planned to spend a few minutes at their house getting to know their new grandson. What are you going to say to him? Abigail bit her lower lip. I'm going to politely inform him that I intend to marry his daughter immediately. While at the courthouse, Abigail and I made a quick jaunt down the hall to the county clerk's office to apply for a marriage license. This was happening whether Trevor Johnson wanted to give me permission or not. I would, however, like his blessing. Don't worry, I'll be respectful, I said. I have faith in you, she gulped. I leaned forward and placed a quick kiss on her lips, and then opened my car door and straightened my sport coat. This was a difficult conversation for any man to have with his future father-in-law, even if the man hadn't instigated his arrest the day before. My heart raced as I knocked on the Johnsons' front door. Karen Johnson lifted her chin with resolve but didn't speak as she held open the door for me to enter the foyer. Trevor leaned his shoulder against the wall in the hallway, arms crossed and a piercing gaze. Let you out on bail, did they? Trevor grumbled. Typical. Do you really think I'm that big of a menace to society that I'd need to be locked away while awaiting trial? He didn't answer me. I stuck my hands in my pockets. Actually, the judge dropped all charges, spoke with authorities in Michigan, and decided I'd serve out the remainder of my probation here in Indiana, where I can help raise my son. Your son already has plenty of male role models in his life. You are not necessary. Abigail and I are getting married. Karen gasped. Was this really a shock to her? I tilted my head, confused. Immediately. Karen whimpered. Seriously? We've already applied for a marriage license, I said. Trevor huffed and turned to walk away. Mr. Johnson, I called after him, and he stopped but didn't turn around. I forgive you. He wheeled and glared at me and then stalked forward with narrowed eyes. I didn't back down. You forgive me? You should be asking my forgiveness after you raped my daughter. By this point, his voice had raised to an uncomfortable level. I wished I could cringe away from him, but I lifted my chin with confidence. I have already asked your forgiveness for that, I said. You can decide if you'd like to forgive me, but you crossed a line when you instigated my arrest 2 days ago, and that is what I forgive you for. You deserve to be arrested. Trevor still hadn't lowered his voice to a normal level. Do I? I let my question hang in the air. He didn't answer. Judge Whiteford disagrees with you. I glanced back and forth between the two people who would soon be my in-laws. The way I see this is you have two choices. Either you can accept me as your family and have complete and total access to the grandson you adore and your beautiful daughter, or you can drive a wedge between our families and be estranged from your daughter and grandson. Are you threatening me? Trevor asked. I'm stating the facts, Mr. Johnson. I can almost guarantee with 99% likelihood that both of them will choose me over you. That's preposterous, he said. They've lived with us their whole lives. We've supported them all this time while you were in prison. He stepped closer and towered over me. I still didn't flinch. Don't you think it's time for me to take responsibility for the child I helped create? You have no parental rights to a child you created by an act of rape. He didn't back down. Actually, I do, sir. According to the laws in the state of Michigan, as an adult, Abigail is allowed to state definitively that I am allowed father's rights for my child, and she has done so. I appreciate the way you've supported them all these years, but it's time you be relieved of that duty. As of today, I will be providing complete physical and financial care for my wife and son. She is not your wife. Would he ever admit defeat? She will be in about 2 days, I said. Not if I have any say in the matter. You don't. Trevor, Karen placed her hand on his arm. I want us to have contact with our daughter and grandson. It's time we put our differences aside for the benefit of our family. I disagree. Trevor turned and walked down the hall. I didn't stop him this time. He'll come around, Karen told me. This is just hard for him. That's understandable. The door behind me opened and Abigail stepped into the foyer. Her mother pulled Abigail into her arms and they held each other, not crying, just holding each other. I stood back and let them have a moment. Where's Daddy? Abigail pulled back from her mom, clasping her elbows in a half hug. He went that way. I pointed down the hall. I want to talk to him for a few minutes and then get some things packed for me and Jaden. Abigail left her mom's embrace and wrapped her arms around my waist, tipping her head back to look up at me. Why don't you go back over to Coach's house and spend some time with your parents? I'll meet you over there in a little while. Okay. I leaned down and kissed the top of her head. No need to fuel the fire by showing any higher level of affection in front of her mother. There would be plenty of time for that at the hotel room later. Chapter 39. No Going Back. Abigail. Daddy, I stepped onto the back porch where my dad leaned against the railing, staring out over the backyard where he had built a small haven for his grandson. Climbing toys, sandboxes, monkey bars, a pirate ship, everything a preschool boy could want. This was more than just longing to protect his daughter from a man who'd hurt her. My dad would be losing the grandson he'd helped raise. I vowed to tread lightly and try to repair this relationship before it was too late. Jaden will always see your house as his home. I leaned against the railing beside my father, drawing in the afternoon scent of fresh-cut grass. This is the only home he's ever known. That man is stealing you from us, my dad growled, just like he stole your innocence. I'm leaving on my own accord. I wished I could wave a magic wand and help my parents see the love I felt for Kaelen. Our adult relationship would forever be clouded by the mistakes we'd made as teenagers. I know you don't want to hear this, but I had every intention of having sex with Kaelen that night. You're right, I don't want to hear this. Too bad. I'm telling you anyway. Your sweet, innocent little girl was doing very inappropriate things with her boyfriend that night and knew exactly what she planned to do when she lay down on that bed. This isn't helping, he said. I don't care. The only way you're going to get past what Kaelen did is to realize that he and I did that together. If you're going to hate anyone, you need to hate me too. I could never hate you. My dad turned to look at me. How could you think that? Well, I could never hate him. That's different. You're my daughter. And he's the father of my child. I placed my hand on my dad's arm. And he's going to be my husband. Very soon. Like within the next 2 days. He hasn't asked my permission to marry you. You don't own me, Dad. And I'm not a little girl anymore. Maybe a few years ago he might have asked permission to take me on a date, which he didn't. Dad raised his voice. I was too young to date, I reminded him. Exactly. He should have kept his damn hands to himself. And he went to prison because he didn't, I yelled right back. How many times does he need to be punished for something he did 5 years ago when he was a teenager? He's dealt with the guilt and remorse and pain of having hurt me. You throwing it back in his face is not helping anything or anyone. My dad didn't answer. He just stood there with his arms crossed and a scowl. Daddy, I love you. And I love Kaelen. And I love Jaden. I want us to be a family. I want you to forgive him. And forgive me. Without a word, my dad pulled me into his arms and started sobbing. I cried right along with him. We needed this. We needed to yell and cry and get angry and get sad and allow ourselves to grieve for a future that changed when I was 15 years old. My life didn't end. It wasn't ruined or destroyed. It just changed. We needed to accept that change. My dad needed to accept that change. I'd made peace with my new future the minute I held Jaden in my arms and looked down into his little face. A miniature Kaelen, evidence of our love. We couldn't go back in time and recreate that night, choosing to say no to alcohol, pushing each other away when our makeout session went a little too far, choosing not to go into that bedroom together. We couldn't go back and change the violence we experienced. We couldn't fix any of that, but we could go forward. We were going forward. Finally, my dad was able to find a way to go forward too. Chapter 40. A Very Boring Honeymoon. Kaelen. 3 sets of parents gathered together around a little boy who only saw love. A mommy and daddy who loved him and loved each other. His mommy's parents and his daddy's parents. Somehow we managed to pull together a wedding in 3 days, including a small reception at the hotel where we'd been staying since the day I'd left the courtroom. Tomorrow, Abigail and I would be leaving for a 10-day honeymoon, and then she and I would move into married housing along with our son. After only a brief explanation of what Mommy and Daddy were going to be doing the whole time we were on our honeymoon, Jaden was more than happy to remain home with Grandma and Grandpa for 10 days. Staying in a tiny hotel room with no toys and no going outside to play didn't sound like fun to him. When we explained that Mommy and Daddy wanted to sleep in each morning and that all we wanted to do was kiss each other all day long, he was convinced. A honeymoon sounded very boring to a 4-year-old. Thankfully. Our parents were grudgingly proud of Abigail and me for making the right choice by getting married. They still couldn't grasp that we'd planned to get married since the first time we kissed. That hot cheerleader on the sidelines of the football field with her short shorts and long flowing brown hair now stood before me in a white dress with red trim. No one else understood why I wanted my cummerbund and bow tie to be yellow, or why the flowers we chose for Abigail's bouquet had to be tulips in full bloom to reveal red, orange, and yellow centers that resembled flames. Although we exchanged simple rings when we said our vows, we added another piece of jewelry that I paid extra to have a jeweler engrave on short notice, a gold bracelet with a flat panel that read 2H2 gaseous plus O2 gaseous yields 2H2O gaseous. Even after all these years apart, there was still a fire, an energy, a spark that existed between us. I was hydrogen gas, and Abigail was just the right amount of heat to create combustion. Epilogue. Kaelen. Stand up if you are 16 years old. I raised my hand to the crowded gym full of high school students. Wearing my Ball State University jersey, I was more than just a motivational speaker. I was a star football player coming off a MAC championship winning season, preparing for my first bowl game as a college athlete. I was also fulfilling my hours of community service, but the kids didn't need to know that. 16-year-olds, remain standing if you are ready to become a mother or father right now. Everyone in that gym sat down quickly. My wife, Abigail, was 16 years old when she gave birth to our son, Jaden. Murmurs ran through the crowded gym as the kids took that into consideration. Now, stand up if you are 18 years old or a senior in high school. Those who fell into that demographic reluctantly stood, already knowing exactly what I was about to say. Remain standing if you are ready to become a mother or father right now. One guy remained standing, arms folded and a smirk on his face. There was always one. Congratulations, man. When's our due date? Someone in the crowd called out. 9 months after the homecoming dance. That brought chuckles, guffaws, applause, mostly from the guys in the gym. Jeers, taunts. I didn't wait long before interrupting. I was 18 when my son was born. I looked directly at the boy who was about to become a man. Becoming a dad is an honor, and I wish you the best of luck. That shut everybody up. I pulled my gaze away from the boy who was about to become a teen parent and focused on the bigger issue. I spent the past 5 years in prison. That caused a stir and got their attention. No, I don't mean being a dad is like being in prison. Being a dad is awesome. No, I literally spent the past 5 years in prison. I gave the crowd a few seconds to process that and to realize what I was about to say was no longer a warning about teen abstinence. Drinking alcohol as a 21-year-old is not safe. I asked a friend of mine who has a medical degree to tell me at what age drinking alcohol is safe, because I've heard the human brain is not fully developed at the age of 21, and she told me drinking alcohol is never safe. Let me say that again, guys. Drinking alcohol is never safe. I let that sink into their stubborn, defiant high school skulls. I don't want you to stand up this time. I'm not going to ask you to admit whether or not you've done something that we all know is illegal, but answer in your own head. Have you ever drank even a sip of alcohol? And just think about that for a minute. I didn't give them a full minute, and I spoke more quietly this time. I bet I can count on one hand the number of people in this gym who have never tasted alcohol. Now they were squirming. They probably thought they knew why I had gone to prison. I was very uncomfortable that I was about to admit what I was about to admit. Raise your hand if you think I went to prison because I drank alcohol. Some naive kids raised their hand, but most probably realized that taking a few sips of alcohol would not land a guy in prison for 5 years. Raise your hand if you think I went to prison because I gave my girlfriend alcohol. More hands went up. Raise your hand if you think I went to prison because I had sex with my girlfriend when we were both drunk. Most of the hands in the room went up. Who remembers how old my wife was when she gave birth to our son? I held up my hand. Someone called out, 16! I pointed right at the guy who called out, and what is the age of consent for a girl to have sex with an 18-year-old man? I emphasized the word man to remind them this wasn't just a couple of kids in the backseat of a car letting their teenage hormones get the better of them. Some called out 15, some called out 16. In the state of Michigan, where I lived at the time, the age of consent is 16. Abigail was 3 weeks shy of 16. That brought some murmurs, but also dirty looks and judgment in the eyes of many of the teens, especially the girls. Wait until they find out the real reason I went to prison. This is the last time I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. I couldn't even look at them. My gaze was to the gym floor, where scuff marks from athletic shoes marred the shining wood. Raise your hand if you think the reason I went to prison was because I got my underage girlfriend drunk at a party and had sex with her. I didn't even look up to see how many of them raised their hand. My voice remained so quiet I wasn't sure the microphone even picked it up. I raped my girlfriend that night. A shocked rumble tore through the crowded gym, and I felt their judgment from all the way down on the gym floor. I lifted my gaze and met the eyes of some boys in the crowd. I'm going to say that a little louder in case there were any students in this gym who didn't hear me. I raped my girlfriend that night. I gave alcohol to my underage girlfriend at a party, took her into my friend's bedroom, and raped her. I didn't give them longer to let that sink in. Why on earth would a man who is in love with a girl who he met in the school library, take advantage of her at a party. I didn't wait for them to answer my rhetorical question. Let me say that again. I loved my girlfriend. I love her still. She is now my wife and the mother of my son. Remember when I started this conversation and asked if any of you have tasted alcohol? I raised my hand but continued. I had barely kissed this incredible young lady. No, that's a lie. We made out a lot. We just did it behind everyone's back. She wasn't even old enough to date me. My parents didn't know we were seeing each other. Her parents didn't know we were seeing each other. The teachers and coaches probably suspected we were seeing each other, but never confronted us about it. Our friends knew we were seeing each other, but probably didn't realize we were in love. The night everyone found out we were seeing each other was the night I was hauled away in handcuffs and my girlfriend was taken to the hospital. But they still didn't think we were in love. They all thought we were too young to know what love is. They thought I was a child predator creep who lured a young girl I'd met at a party into a bedroom and raped her. They thought I deserved to be locked up forever, castrated, and hung by my toenails. By this time, some kids were crying. Some were in shock. Most wouldn't look me in the eye. I continued. How many of you own an iPhone or Android or some sort of electronic device? I pointed to the one kid who was typing on his phone even while I was talking. Like this guy. He looked up sheepishly and many people chuckled. They probably all wondered where I was going with this turn in the conversation. I know you all have them. Pull them out of your pockets or backpacks or purses and hold them up in the air. I held mine up to make a point. They all fumbled around, and when most kids had their phones out, I continued. Now, take your phone and throw it as far as you can and smash it to 1,000,000 pieces on the gym floor. Thankfully, no one took my advice, or I may have needed to replace someone's cell phone. I took my fake old cell phone and threw it on the gym floor as hard as I could and smashed it with my foot. There were gasps throughout the room, understandably. These kids lived with their phones in their hands. If this analogy didn't wake them up, nothing would. That is what happens when you go to prison. For the next 5 years of my life, I didn't hold my cell phone. I didn't check my social media. I didn't play Fortnite on the app I'd downloaded. I couldn't text my girlfriend to let her know I was sorry and to ask her if she was okay. I had texted her and called her and sent her Instagram posts and heart emojis and Snapchat messages every flippin' day for months while we were seeing each other, and I couldn't ask her if she was okay. I wasn't legally allowed to ask the love of my life if she was okay. At this point, I was choked up and trying really hard not to cry in front of 1,000 high school students. And she wasn't okay. She was hurting. She was sick. She was mentally traumatized. She couldn't go back to school. She couldn't get on social media. You know why? Because her so-called friends abandoned her. She was called a slut and a whore, and the guys on my baseball team blamed her when we lost our tournament the next weekend because they lost their star pitcher. By this time, half the student body was crying. And after all that, she found out she was pregnant at 15 years old. No, I think she had turned 16 by then. She was pregnant. Remember when I asked you if you were ready to become a mom or a dad? Think about that right now. What are your plans for this summer? Gone. What grade are you starting in the fall? Gone. What college were you planning to attend? Gone. Now, add this to all of that. Her boyfriend, the father of her child, gone. She lost the plans she had for her future. She lost her best friend. She lost all of her friends. She lost her virginity. For what? A can of beer? Okay, 5 or 6 cans of beer, but still. Let's talk about that beer for a minute. I stopped and took a deep breath to calm myself down. Once you have 1 beer, 2 doesn't sound that bad. 3, whatever. You don't remember having the 4th, and by the 5th, you're playing drinking games and egging on your buddies. By the 6th beer, you're trying to figure out where the hell you're going to throw up without destroying your buddy's carpeting, if you even realize you're going to throw up before it happens. And somewhere in there, you start making out with that hot girl who's been giving you the eye all night. She wants you, you want her. She says yes, you say hell yes, And 9 months later, you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay for diapers and formula. I tried to calm down and stop shaking and stop yelling. I hoped I'd made my point. Don't drink alcohol. Let me say that again, guys and girls. Don't drink alcohol. I realized I'd raised my voice again, but continued. Ever. I took a minute, not looking at any of them, my gaze to the floor again, and I said more quietly into the microphone, the next time your buddies ask you to party with them, think about my story. The next time you and your girls are putting on makeup on Saturday night and trying to decide what miniskirt will match that smoking hot top you bought at the mall, think about my story. The next time anyone suggests you drink alcohol, think of my story. The next time you are tempted to drink alcohol for whatever reason, think of my story. Because I never would have hurt my Abigail if I hadn't been drinking that night. Never. I love her more than my own life. I took a minute to compose myself, then lifted my chin. I'd like you to meet her. I looked toward the gym door, knowing she was standing right outside in the hallway. Please welcome my wife Abigail and our son Jaden. The gym broke out in applause as the most beautiful woman in the world walked into the gym, holding the hand of the most adorable little 4-year-old boy, who was waving and hamming it up for the crowd. When Jaden saw me, he called out, "Daddy!" and ran to me and jumped into my arms. "Hey, buddy." He kissed me and wrapped his little hands around my neck. The first thing I did when I spoke again into the microphone was address that 18-year-old guy who was about to become a dad. "Man, you and I need to talk later, okay? Come see me when we're done because I can give you a little bit of advice. Becoming a dad is one of the best things that ever happened to me. Let's talk, okay?" The kid nodded and glanced at the girl by his side, taking her hand in his. I turned to Abigail and leaned over to give her a quick kiss. Somebody in the crowd whistled. I lifted my gaze to the gym full of kids and held the microphone up. "Isn't she beautiful?" They all cheered again. "I want to hand the microphone to Abigail for a few minutes." She took the microphone from me and stepped forward, taking the floor naturally as if she were meant to be a public speaker. "I want to talk to the ladies in the room for a few minutes." She didn't waste time with introductions. "But you guys need to hear this too, so pay attention." I handed Jaden off to a babysitter we hired to come with us when we spoke at these events. This wasn't a conversation he needed to listen to. The gym full of teenagers settled and quieted, ready to hear Abigail's side of the story. "My boyfriend raped me." The crowd had a similar reaction when she said the words as when I said the words. "It has taken me 5 years of counseling to be able to stand here today and say those words out loud. He was at fault, and I was the victim that day. Right?" She waited, and no one had the guts to answer. No means no, right? Hashtag me too, right? Maybe some of you in this room know exactly how I felt that night. I won't ask you to raise your hands. If you, girls or guys, have felt violated in any way by someone, anyone, a boyfriend, girlfriend, best friend, uncle, stepdad, mom's drunk boyfriend, some guy at a party, get help. There is help. Come talk to me, or if you don't feel comfortable talking to me, talk to someone, even if it's just your best friend. Even a little bit of counseling or just talking about your feelings can help. This is serious. It can have long-term consequences on your mental health and your physical health. Heck, you might have a baby because of it. You might have a sexually transmitted disease. You might feel guilt or shame. Get help, please. She stopped for a minute, and some of the girls in the audience were sniffling. Now I want to tell you a story about when I was a little girl. We had these railroad tracks that ran through our backyard. Our property line butted up to that railroad track. I used to run up to that track when we heard the train coming, and we would hold up our hand, asking the train conductor to toot his horn, and we'd wave to the people inside the train cars, and we'd count the number of cars, and see how many different animals were in the cars, and see what kind of corn and soybeans and coal were in those train cars. We had so much fun. We loved those trains, and we ran back to see those trains every chance we got. That was exciting. So exciting I remember it to this day, even as an adult. She paused for a minute. I knew what was coming, and I was curious how the teenagers would react. How did we know when a train was coming so that we could run up to those train tracks? She didn't wait for anyone to answer her rhetorical question. Those trains honked their horns at every single road crossing from the edge of town until they got to my backyard. Every few seconds, those trains blew their horns, warning us they were coming so we could stay out of the way. There was never one single train that snuck up on us and raced through our backyard quietly and then sped away into the night. Not one. By that time, some kids had folded arms and angry faces. How many of you think that if I heard that train coming from a mile away and saw that train coming with my own eyes, racing toward me at full speed, and I stepped onto those railroad tracks and held up my hand and yelled, "Stop!" would that train be able to stop? Abigail stopped talking and waited. There was always one person in the gym who called out, "No means no!" And Abigail looked right at that girl with a smirk. "Ah, but I didn't say no to Kaelen," Abigail said. "I wasn't trying to stop Kaelen at all. We had talked about having sex. Someday. We had planned to be each other's first. Someday. I wanted him just as much as he wanted me. You think girls don't have hormones just like guys? You think girls don't want to have sex? You are sticking your head in the sand if you think girls don't want to have sex." She had raised her voice, and she had everyone's attention. She pointed to me, still standing there dressed in my Ball State University football jersey. "That is one hot piece of man right there." Many people in the gym chuckled. Some clapped. Some whistled. "Ladies, if you ain't attracted to a guy like him, you must be gay." That brought on more chuckles. "And if you are gay, there's probably a girl in this room who you think is just as hot as I think he is. Am I right?" No one answered, but there were some people who chuckled or whistled. "And guys, if you're gay, sorry, he's taken. Maybe there's some other guy in this room who you can go after." "I'm available." A guy in a varsity jacket stood up and raised his hand, turning around as if to show off his manliness. The crowd of kids broke out in applause and whistles and jeers. 30 years ago, no high school guy would have been brave enough to do that. Good for him. "See, there you go," Abigail pointed to the young athlete. "A guy almost as hot as Kaelen." More laughter and whistles. But seriously, back to my point. I wanted Kaelen. I did not tell him no. In fact, I had my hands down his pants. He had his hands up my shirt. We were making out, hot and heavy, and I was ready, and he was ready, and we were planning to have sex that night. I had a hard time looking at the crowd, and I was impressed that she was brave enough to admit all that out loud to a bunch of teenagers. Remember my train analogy a few minutes ago? I didn't tell Kaelen no, but I did tell him to stop, and he couldn't. Let me say that again. He couldn't stop. He was drunk. I was drunk. He had very little control over his body at that point, and it hurt so flippin' bad that I cried. I cried so loud that my friends came running to help me. He raped me. Abigail pointed at me, and I couldn't look at her. After 5 years, I still felt terrible for what I did to her that night. She continued, "Let me say that again so I'm clear about this. My boyfriend raped me. The man I loved, the man I still love to this day, hurt me so bad that I cried." Most of the people in that gym were crying, or sniffling, or fighting tears. "But let me go back to my train analogy once again," Abigail said. "Did I see that train coming down the tracks? Hell yes, I did. Did I know the danger? Yes. Did I know that there was no possible way that a train speeding down the tracks would be able to stop when I stood on the train tracks or laid down on the train tracks? Yes, I did. Do I take any responsibility for what he did? Yes, I do." She stopped and let that sink in. "And you know who else I blame? I blame every one of our friends who were also drinking. Every one of our friends who didn't stop me from drinking, just like I didn't stop them from drinking. Friends don't let friends get into situations like that. Don't just offer to be a designated driver. Stop your friends from getting into that situation in the first place. I also blame the older brother who bought the alcohol for a bunch of teenagers that night. Was I a victim that night? Yes, I was. But you know who else was a victim that night? Kaelen. She pointed at me again. Kaelen lost all the same things I lost that night. He lost his best friend. He lost his virginity. He lost his freedom. He lost his dignity. He lost his friends. You think he could look his friends in the eye after they walked in on him raping his girlfriend? No, he lost everything, just like I did. And for what? A few beers? That buzzed feeling? That high? Abigail turned around and walked back toward me, gazing up into my face, love and happiness radiating from her. She took my hand. She spoke to the gym full of kids, but looked at me. When we finally made love as adults years later, we both wished we had waited back when we were teens. She turned around and faced the crowd again. We wished we had waited, not just because of that violent experience, but because we were more mature. We were better able to deal with the emotional connection that comes with giving ourselves completely to the person we loved. If you are a teenager and you are already having sex, I encourage you to stop and take a step back and think about what you're doing. Think about looking your future spouse in the eye and telling them you didn't wait for them. Decide now to wait from now on. If you're not having sex, consider choosing to wait. It's not impossible, trust me. If you're thinking about having sex, talk to someone to get advice. You're welcome to talk to one of us or a trusted adult or even one of your best friends. Even when Kaelen and I were adults and chose to have sex again after years apart, it was a big decision that we didn't take lightly. There is nothing casual about sex. I'm going to hand the microphone back over to my husband for some closing remarks. As Abigail handed me the microphone, the kids in the gym broke out in applause for her. Isn't Abigail fantastic? I asked into the microphone. Let's give her one more round of applause. As they clapped, I leaned down for a little kiss, and some people whistled. I gave them my attention again, but kept my arm around Abigail's shoulders, and she wrapped her arms around my waist. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you learned a little bit today from our story. This isn't an easy story to tell, but I think it's important. Adults don't say these things to kids, and we should. I know we talked a lot about sex today, and that's kind of fun. Okay, sex is really fun. That brought cheers and whistles, especially from the guys in the room. My comment also brought a quick smack to my gut from my wife, and I tickled her and then continued. But seriously, I hope we made our point about not drinking alcohol. The biggest thing I want you to take away from what we've said today is that none of those horrible things would have happened if we had been sober. I would have been able to control myself if I'd been sober. I would never hurt this beautiful woman who I love more than life itself. She would have never laid down on those railroad tracks if she had been sober. I don't know the statistics, but I'd wager that a huge percentage of challenges facing teens would be eliminated if we eliminated alcohol from the equation. Reach out to either of us if you want to talk. We're here for you. Thank you for being a great audience. Stay safe and stay sober. The entire gym of 1,000 high school teenagers rose to their feet in thunderous applause, and Abigail and I stood in the middle of the gym. She reached up for me, and I leaned down to her, and we gave each other one more kiss before we were engulfed by teens wanting to shake our hands and give us hugs and open a conversation. If anything good came from our experience, it was that we opened a conversation. Stay safe and stay sober. Now a quick message from author Julie Spencer, which is me, if you haven't figured that out yet. If you need help, please reach out to someone. There are ways to get help. If you or someone you know needs help dealing with sexual violence, please contact the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, or RAINN.org, or call 800-656-HOPE. That's 800-656-4673. If you or someone you know needs help dealing with alcohol or drug abuse, please contact the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, samhsa.gov, or call 800-662-HELP. That's 800-662-4357. If you loved Combustion, please let me know. The greatest compliment an author can receive is to have their readers take the time to come and tell me how much you loved or hated the story. And if you ever want to talk, please get in touch with me. I would love to talk to you. To survivors everywhere, thank you for waking up today. Thank you for taking one more step, even if it seems impossible. If any of this story is different than your story, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me your story. I'll listen. Sincerely, Julie L. Spencer. That's me. I look forward to hearing from you, and you can find me at authorjuliespencer.com.